And Project 2025 is pretty grim stuff, but there's a number of legislators who are, already putting into place some of its provisions, particularly at the state level. But here we've got Joe Manchin and Republican Senator John Barrasso, who, by the way, is linked to Project 2025. They are the chair and the ranking member of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Joe Manchin, whose family owns a coal company. He's a multi-millionaire because of his coal company. And in fact, he used his political clout years ago to keep open a coal plant that used the particular type of coal that his coal company sells so that his family could get rich. Anyhow, these two guys have introduced the Energy Permitting Reform Act of 2024, and it's right out of Project 2025. It quote, advocates, quote, limiting opportunities for communities to challenge projects, loosening oversight for drilling and mining projects, extending drilling permits, and fast-tracking liquid natural gas permits, and several other provisions friendly to fossil fuel giants, according to the National Resources Defense Council. These are nearly identical policies to what's proposed in Project 2025. The Heritage Foundation, they call it Unleashing All of America's Energy Reserves, and it includes ending federal restrictions on fossil fuel drilling in public lands, limiting investments in renewable energy, and rolling back environmental permitting restrictions for new oil, gas, and coal projects, including power plants. Manchin has been trying and failing to pass this kind of stuff for years. Brett Hartle, Director of Public Affairs at the Center for Biological Diversity, said that his, quote, Frankenstein legislation is taken straight from Project 2025, and it's the biggest giveaway in decades to the fossil fuel industry. He goes on to say the bill deprives communities of the power to defend themselves and gives that power to big oil by making it harder for communities to challenge polluting projects in court, and prioritizes the profits of coal barons, like Joe Manchin himself, over public health. He goes on to say Monday was the hottest day in recorded history. It's shocking that as the climate emergency continues to break records around us, the Senate continues to fast-track the fossil fuel expansion that is killing us. This dangerous bill does not deserve a floor vote. And indeed, the 4 hottest days ever were last week. Global temperatures spiked to their highest levels in recorded history on Monday. This is a week ago Monday. As that happened, ambulances were screaming through the city streets of Tokyo, carrying scores of people who had collapsed amid an unrelenting heat wave, right? Sarah Kaplan over at the Washington Post. A monster typhoon has emerged from the scorching waters of the Pacific Ocean. Thousands of vacationers fled the idyllic mountain town of Jasper, Canada, ahead of a fast-moving wall of wildfire flames. She writes, by the end of this week, which saw the 4 hottest days ever observed by scientists, we're talking last week, dozens had been killed in the raging floodwaters and massive mudslides triggered by Typhoon Gami. Half of Jasper was reduced to ash, and about 3.6 billion people around the planet had endured temperatures that would have been exceedingly rare in a world without burning fossil fuels. Since last July, Earth's average temperature has been consistently 1.5 degrees or more above pre-industrial levels. What we're finding now is that because of this heat, forests are actually less able to pull carbon dioxide out of the air. Now that's called a negative feedback loop. This is where as the heat goes up, the ability to counter that heat goes down. I guess you could call that even a positive feedback loop, in that it's adding to the, and not a positive thing, a negative thing, but it's adding to the heat, right? Sea ice around Antarctica is at record lows. Coral bleaching became so extreme that scientists had to come up with a new scale for measuring it. And this is on the heels of 13 straight months of unprecedented temperatures. We got to do something about this. You know, Leo DiCaprio and I put together a video. You can find it over on YouTube. Just plug his name and my name into the YouTube search thing at the top, and it's the top thing that pops up. It's called Last Hours. And it's about what happens if we see a significant rise in ocean temperatures. I mean, the ocean temperatures around the Middle East, around Taiwan right now, are almost 3 degrees Celsius warmer than normal. That's radical. These are just extreme temperature shifts. And what we point out in the film, along with a number of the world's top climate scientists, is that during the PETM, the Permian Eocene thermal maximum. Now this was, I'd have to go back and look when this was. I'm sorry, I shouldn't quote the number of million years without knowing the exact number, but anyhow, this is not as far back as the Permian mass extinction, which was 249 million years ago. This was more like, something like 40, 50, 60 million years ago, something like that, maybe 100 and something. Again, look it up, fact check me. But during the PETM, there was a spike in global temperatures that seemed to have been a function of solar activity, actually, or changes in the Earth's orbit. And what happened was the oceans got warm enough, this is about a 5-degree spike, and the oceans got warm enough that these giant beds of frozen methane under the ocean that follow the continental shelves of all over the world, around all continents. This is where vegetation, seaweed, has died and rotted and converted itself into methane. This is what naturally happens when vegetable matter decomposes. It produces methane as methane gas as the consequence of that. And we call that natural gas. And these methane beds, they're called clathrates because it's methane that is frozen in water, in seawater. And so it's like a snow cone. It's like a slurry. And, I mean, literally, miles long, miles wide, multiple feet deep, hundreds of billions of tons of this stuff around the Earth. And if the water warms up to the point where this clathrate starts to, it's called dissociate, in other words, to melt and then just return from a solid state or a semi-liquid state back into a gaseous state, and then bubble out of the oceans into our atmosphere, then you see this sudden spike in temperature. And that sudden spike in temperature during the PETM killed something like 70 or 80% of all life on Earth. I mean, it just makes the planet uninhabitable for species like us. And of course, during the Permian mass extinction, it was even worse. That was a 95% killing off. They called it the great dying of all life on Earth. And that was caused, again, by the oceans warming up to the point where the clathrates, the methane clathrates, started to dissociate. This is referred to as the clathrate gun hypothesis. And it's very controversial. It's not 100% accepted by scientists. But there's a lot of speculation around it, and it's clearly a very, very much worst case scenario. It's not likely to happen, but it could happen, and it has happened in the past, or appears to be that it has happened in the past. So Project 2025, these fossil fuel billionaires, the fossil fuel multimillionaires like Joe Manchin, these people don't give a damn about the fate and future of the human race. They just want as much money as they can get, as quickly as they can get it, so that they can live on their yachts and they can fly around in their private jets, and they can build their mansions and just have the kind of life that they want to have, and to hell with their children and their grandchildren. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. So what's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Who do you think Kamala Harris should be picking for vice president? How do you think the race is going? Are you with me that this is going to be a blowout this fall?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour. I'll be right back with your calls. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends.
It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today is America on Fire by Dr. Elizabeth Hinton. The subtitle, The Untold Story of Police Violence and Black Rebellion Since the 1960s. I'm reading from the introduction. On a cold Monday at the start of February, Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, Ezell Blair Jr., and David Richmond sat down at a whites-only lunch counter at Woolworth's in Greensboro, North Carolina. A waiter refused to serve the young men and suggested they order takeout instead. The four North Carolina A&T students remained at the counter. The store manager approached and asked them to leave. Still, they did not move. A police officer arrived, slapping his nightstick in his hand in an attempt to intimidate. Rather than allow the students' offense against Jim Crow to continue, the manager of the store closed the store for the day. 24 black students returned on Tuesday. Over 50 black students and 3 white students participated in the sit-in on the next day, Wednesday, February 3rd, 1960. News of the protests spread, and soon the sit-in movement had expanded to 55 cities and 13 states. By April, over 50,000 students were involved. Conceived and organized entirely by young people, the sit-in movement ultimately led to the founding of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, SNCC, which was run by activists such as John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael. As a Fisk student, Lewis participated in the sit-ins in Nashville, Tennessee, and he would go on to steer the Freedom Riders in the summer of 1961 and speak at the March on Washington in 1963. Carmichael joined the sit-in movement as a high school student and would famously call for Black Power at the SNCC rally in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1966. Together, Lewis, Carmichael, and tens of thousands of other young black Americans signaled that their generation was prepared to risk their lives for freedom and equality. From Greensboro onward, the sit-ins helped build momentum and support for racial justice. The students in Greensboro engaged in a nonviolent protest to demand full integration, the right to vote, equal educational opportunities, decent jobs, protection against white supremacist terrorism, and an end to police violence. These were the central aims of the civil rights movement more broadly. By the end of the decade, black students at North Carolina A&T State University were still protesting, but now they were destroying property, assaulting police officers, and shooting in the direction of law enforcement, if not coming close to killing cops in self-defense. In May 1969, after black students at Greensboro's James B. Dudley High School were arrested, brutalized, and tear gassed by police during a series of protests against arbitrary disciplinary measures, A&T students came to the teenagers' defense. The confrontations between local police and black high school and college students led authorities to call the National Guard to A&T's campus, unleashing violence and repression that ended in the killing of sophomore Willie Grimes. A pivotal stop on the road to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, by the end of the decade, Greensboro was a site of sustained violence. It was far from unique in this regard. Between 1964 and 1972, but especially between 68 and 72, the United States endured internal violence on a scale not seen since the Civil War. Every major urban center in the country burned during those 8 years. Violence flared up not only in archetypal ghettos, including Harlem and Watts, and in majority black cities such as Detroit and Washington, D.C. It appeared in Greensboro, North Carolina, in Gary, Indiana, in Seattle, Washington, and countless places in between. Every city, small or large, where black residents lived in segregated, unequal conditions. In the North and the South, the East and the West, the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, black people threw rocks and bottles at police, shot at them with rifles, smashed the windows of businesses and institutions, hurled firebombs, and plundered local stores. These events, what we commonly call riots, or what people who are to the left of center sometimes refer to as civil disturbances, caused hundreds of millions of dollars of property damage. Most immediately, they shaped the lives of the store owners whose businesses were destroyed, of the parents who lost their teenage sons to the police, and of the firefighters and cops who were harmed or killed. But ever since, Americans have been living in a nation and a national culture created in part by the extreme violence of the 1960s and the early 1970s. The aftershocks of that era have, at times, taken the form of mass violence to which all Americans have been witness. In Miami in 1980, in Los Angeles in 1992, in Cincinnati in 2001, and in more recent years, in Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. The enduring impact of the violence of the 60s and 70s has been felt more regularly and more acutely by black people in American cities who faced new policing practices that emerged under the banner of the war on crime. The routine stop and frisks that attacked people's dignity, the breaking up of community gatherings, the presence of armed, uniformed officers in the hallways of under-resourced public schools, and more. Such strategies help repress mass violence as a regular phenomenon, but they ironically made further riots inevitable. Those strategies remain in place today. The book, America on Fire.
We say fight back!
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Thursday. What is that, mini Friday, I guess? It's a little Friday? Okay. Oh, my, so much going on. We had a terrible, I should stop smiling right now because there was a terrible school shooting yesterday in Georgia. And I'll get to all our headlines in just a moment, but this is just great. This is from Democracy Labs. The top 13 Republican excuses to do nothing about gun violence. Number one, it's not the right time. Number two, it's the school's fault. Number three, only thoughts and prayers are needed. Number four, we need guns for the next insurrection. Number five, the MAGA Supreme Court has blocked gun safety reform, so we can't do anything. Next one, common sense doesn't apply to gun safety. Another one, we only worry about the unborn. Another one, we do whatever the gun lobby says. Another one, just make everybody wear body armor, you know, we give kids bulletproof backpacks. They sell them now on Target. Another one, everyone needs a gun. Another one, shooters will be shooters. And finally, both sides need guns, don't you know? Yeah, it's pretty grim. It really is. Anyhow, Donald Trump and the GOP have a plan to shut down the government via their Big Lie 2.0, which will have the side benefit of helping them disenfranchise millions of American voters. I'll tell you about that in a moment. Speaking of the big lie, his cultists are freaking out that Trump just admitted that he lost the last election. And Oklahoma school officials are in full revolt over the mandate from Kevin Stitt, their governor, and their head of the Department of Education, that they teach the Bible in elementary school. In our second hour, our single guest today, Phil Ittner, our regular Thursday visit with Phil, live from Ukraine. We'll get an update on what's going on there. And also an amazing story. You ever had a conversation with somebody about something and then, you pick up your phone and you look at, whatever, and you see an ad for the exact same thing you were just talking about? Well, it turns out there's a company that's actually marketing a product that has your phone listening to you. and it's one of the largest media companies in America. I'll tell you about that in the second hour of the program. In our third hour, our Geeky Science. Is staying calm and carrying on the key to longer life? Or should we just, freak out when bad things happen and get it out? Also, we all owe Trump an apology. I'll explain in the third hour. Just a heads up, by the way, the Saturday night, today is Thursday, so what is that, 3 nights from now, however you count them. Stephanie Miller's Sexy Liberal Save the World Comedy Tour will be here in Portland at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, and I will be there. I won't be a big part of it, but I'll drop in and I'll be on stage. So tickets are available, I believe. I don't think they're sold out, but you can find it online fairly easily. So to start out, Big Lie 2.0. The headline over at HartmannReport.com is Trump and the GOP's Big Lie 2.0, their plan to shut down America this fall. There's really kind of 2 parts to this story. The first is that Donald Trump thinks that by shutting down the government, he is going to gain some benefit, that it'll just piss off people and they will direct their anger at President Biden. And if they're angry enough at President Biden because, they're not getting their Social Security checks or Medicare's not paying the bills or the national parks are closed or whatever, if they're sufficiently upset, then they will take that out on Kamala Harris's presidential campaign, she being the vice president, of course. I think that's bad logic. I believe that history shows, outside of the one time that Newt Gingrich shut down the government in, 96, I think, or 97, and Bill Clinton got hurt by that. But other than that, every time and it's always been Republicans, Democrats have never shut down the government. But there's been 4 or 5 times that Republicans have shut down the government, and it sure seems to me like every time it's hurt them. But anyhow, the strategy that Trump wants to use to do this is requiring that in the must-pass budget legislation, which has to pass before the end of this month, the new fiscal year, 2025 fiscal year for the federal government begins on October 1st. So here we are, it's September 5th. So, in roughly, 25 days, 26 days, it's going to be the end of the year. And if we don't appropriate money for next year, which starts October 1st, then the government shuts down. Now, they'll do that dance. Janet Yellen will, find little money here and there, and, it'll take about a month before it really bites hard, and which means that it goes right into October, which is the peak of early voting, and, of course, right up to the edge of November. And, we've got an election in the first week of November. So Trump thinks this is going to work, and he thinks that it'll work by inserting this provision in this must-pass budget legislation that says that in every state, when you register to vote, you must prove your citizenship. Now, the reason that they're pushing this is because they know that the lower on the income ladder a person is, the less likely they are to have proof, documentary proof, that they are a U.S. citizen. The more likely they are to have somewhere in their life have lost their birth certificate or have lost their change of name if they were married, and, et cetera. So, and the lower people are on the economic ladder, the more likely they are to vote for Democrats. So Republicans know this. So number one, this is, they're just throwing a barrier to voting. Number two, they also know that a lot of American women are seriously pissed off about the Dobbs decision and about 20 Republican states banning abortion. So why does that have anything to do with proving that you're a citizen when you register to vote? Well, according to the National Organization for Women, about a third of all married women have a birth certificate with their maiden name on it, and yet today they use their married name, but they never went through the legal process, the formal legal process of applying to a state to change their name. And therefore, they're not eligible to vote because their citizenship documents and their actual ID show different names. So this could kick as many as, according to the National Organization for Women, 34% of all women
In blue states where we don't have this requirement by and large, and there's a handful of red states too. There's 5 red states right now that have this on the ballot this year. Could kick a lot of women off the voting rolls, which of course is exactly what Republicans want. Now the basis of this entire thing is Big Lie 2.0. Big Lie 1.0 was Trump saying that he didn't lose the election, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Because he just admitted that he lost. But in any case, Trump lying about having, the election stolen from him in 2020. That was Big Lie 1.0. Big Lie 2.0, which really, maybe we should reverse the numbers, I'm not sure, but Big Lie 2.0, which they're reviving now for this piece of legislation, really started in 1964. In 1964, the New York Times reported that Republicans were convinced that the 1960 election was stolen from them by John Kennedy, and they were starting Operation Eagle Eye all across the United States to challenge voters to find those people who aren't actually citizens, to stand outside polling places and say, prove to me you're a citizen. And William Rehnquist, who worked his way all the way up to Supreme Court Chief Justice, was one of the leaders of this movement in Arizona, where he did this at the polling places that were heavily used by Hispanics and Native Americans, particularly Hispanics. And Hispanics, of course, are the target of this in a big way, this time by Republicans. This big lie then has been used now for 60 years to justify a whole range of ways that Republicans prevent people from voting or get their votes rejected. For example, exact signature matching. They're saying that, illegal immigrants and voter fraud, all this kind of stuff, they're forging people's signatures on ballots. And so they're hoping to have 100,000 people observing signature matches on mail-in ballots, almost all in blue cities, mostly in red states. And if one of these Republicans says, hey, that signature doesn't match the signature you have on file, which is real common, by the way, with people over 40, because after 40, your signature starts to change. I don't know if it's that people get sloppy or what the deal is, but it's a known fact that your vote will not get counted unless you show up at the Secretary of State's office within 5 days of the election. So that's one way that they intend to actually reject millions of votes, using this claim that there's voter fraud. There is no voter fraud in the United States. There's no voter fraud anywhere in the developed world. We're the only democracy in the world that worries about voter fraud. Yeah, I know there was a scheme with regard to mail-in ballots busted in England a couple of years ago, but everybody knew that was the exception, not the rule. Same thing here. We had a Republican group in North Carolina that was buying mail-in ballots and forging them. They got busted. There has never been an election that was changed as a result of voter fraud. It's an irrelevant, insignificant thing. But Republicans have used it to make it harder to vote, to justify purges to the voting rolls. This is what Jeb Bush did when he took the list of felon voters from Texas and used it on a merge-purge basis against the voting rolls in Florida to bounce black and Hispanic voters off the voting rolls in Florida in 2000, just before his brother was elected president, sort of. Was selected by the Supreme Court, but, another story. So my bottom line on this is that Democrats need to do what FDR did. They need to call this out. I played this clip yesterday on the program. I won't do it again, but, FDR said, here's Adolf Hitler's big strategy. Just tell the big lie and tell it over and over and over again, and ultimately people will believe it. And this is what they're doing. They're running around saying, oh yeah, the Democrats are importing people from Mexico to vote, which is absolutely not true. It's a lie. But they're using this to justify preventing Americans, particularly Hispanic Americans and black Americans, from voting. And it's working for them. And my call for action is we need to call the damn media out on this, because for 60 years, the Republicans have been promulgating this lie. And for 60 years, the media has been just acting like, oh yeah, maybe there's something legitimate here. There isn't. It's a lie. And we need to call it a lie.
We should become, you know, in most other European countries, in most other countries, if you're a citizen, you get a ballot in the mail, or you just show up and say, hi, I'm a citizen, I'm here to vote. That's it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're literally the only country in the world that makes it hard to vote. Why? Because Republicans know if everybody could vote, no Republican would ever get elected again. To quote Trump. And welcome back. So, picking up your calls here, G in Seattle. Hey, G, what's on your mind today?
Hi. You're often talking about the $50 trillion that was transferred to the 1%.
Yeah, it's got to be more than that now, because when Time Magazine did that story, it was about 6 years ago, I think. So it's probably $55 trillion by now.
I was wondering if, to your knowledge, anyone at the Democratic Convention brought that up or framed things in those terms, because I think it's such a strong talking point.
I did hear that number quoted once. I don't recall who was giving the speech. It wasn't Kamala Harris or Tim Walz, but I do recall that number being cited during the DNC. I'm sorry, I can't tell you who.
Yeah, just to follow the money. I mean, it's the most obvious thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize how much a trillion is. It's a million, right?
That's correct. Or 1,000 billion.
And then 50 times that is just inconceivable, you know, almost.
It's a mind-boggling amount of money. It's why it takes 2 workers today to provide the same lifestyle, really about 2.3 workers today to provide the same lifestyle that 1 worker could provide in 1980, the year that Ronald Reagan got elected.
You know, I think people are hesitant to call out Reaganomics as such because to conservatives, he's such a daddy figure.
Yeah.
You know, they're afraid of offending them.
Yeah. I think you're right, but, you know, it is, this is what Reagan did to us, and it's gotten worse. You know, most of it is the result of these massive tax cuts, and, of course, Trump tripled down on those and added $7 trillion to the deficit. So, yeah. Well,
right,
well
and
said,
I learned
G.
a lot of this from you, so thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Good talking to you, G.
Bye.
Thank you. Josh in Kimball, Minnesota. Hey, Josh, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good morning. I'll try to keep this as concise as possible. The Supreme Court said that presidents have immunity for official acts, not just Trump.
For crimes committed when they call them official acts, yes.
Correct. But why can't Biden just go ahead and sign an executive order getting rid of our obvious 2 corrupt Supreme Court officials and then put on like 2 to 4 Supreme Court justices that actually have a moral compass?
Yeah.
And by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, it'll go to this new court. And the very next thing, or the very next case before the Supreme Court, just have them remove this presidential immunity bullcrap.
Yeah. A, you and I both know that Joe Biden is not going to do that. He's not going to break the law. B, it would get tied up in the courts for quite some time, and it wouldn't be, you know, useful right now. C, it would provoke wild outrage.
It would, but when the Democrats have power, they're honestly too cowardly to actually use it.
I don't think it's cowardly. I think it's called respectful of the rule of law. But, you know, really where this will be used, I mean, the principal thing that the court ruled was that any conversation between Donald Trump and Bill Barr, between the president and the attorney general, including conversations about conspiracies to commit crimes, to like arrest people for no good reason, that kind of thing, that is absolutely immune from any kind of prosecution or even investigation. And that's really terrible. Josh, I get what you're saying. It ain't going to happen, but I get it. I understand the sentiment behind it. I don't totally disagree with it. It's just sadly, it's not going to happen. Thanks for the call. It's 22 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives
to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them.
So the Supreme Court is or at least the Republicans on the Supreme Court are completely out of control. I wrote an op-ed about this over at HartmannReport.com titled "From Oaths to Lies: The GOP's Supreme Court Coup." And they gave king-like powers to the president to break the law and have immunity from prosecution as long as he calls it an official act. I mean, that's literally rewriting Article 2 of the Constitution from 1789. They signed the death warrant for agencies that protect our air, water, food, drugs, and workplace. That dates back to 1887 when the Interstate Commerce Commission was created. They gutted the 14th Amendment's requirement put into place in 1868 that no person who's engaged in an insurrection or rebellion can hold public office. They rewrote the National Firearms Act of 1934 to allow AR-15s with a bump stock to become fully automatic weapons. It's nuts. It goes on from there. You can read the whole piece at HartmannReport.com. But Congress really needs to hold this Supreme Court to account. Check it out.
They told a big lie once and it ripped the truth apart. Claimed the vote was stolen, broke the nation's heart. Now they're back again with a brand new scheme. Big lie 2.0, a nightmare in a dream. Get ready, America, the storm is rolling in. Trump and the GOP playing their game again. Shut it down, tear it up, they don't care who they burn. Big lie 2.0, will we ever learn?
Yep, it's Big Lie 2.0 coming down the road. This old voter fraud lie, and like I said, they're going to try and shut down the government. All right, this is really interesting. A couple of days ago, Trump did an interview with I think it was somebody on Fox News, but in any case, he did this interview where he basically admitted that he lost the 2020 election. He said, we just lost by a little bit, or words to that effect. And remember Nick Fuentes? Nick Fuentes is the Hitler-loving, racist, misogynistic, anti-Semitic, homophobic, Christian nationalist, fascist. He might be an incel too, I don't know. But anyhow, he's got a podcast. And he just went nuts on this yesterday. He said, I lost by a whisker. So what was the point? What's the point of any of it? You lost in 2020? Seriously? What are we even doing anymore? Then you're a loser. You just lost. You lost to Joe Biden. He goes on to say, Trump deserves to be charged by Jack Smith. He said, that actually vindicates the DOJ charge against him because the charge is that he knew he lost, but he lied to defraud the people. So why did we do Stop the Steal? Why January 6th? Why is anyone sitting in jail? Why did anything bad happen to anybody? Why did everyone get censored? He's really on a tear here. He says, why did everything bad that has happened to the people who were involved, why did that need to happen if you're just going to walk it all back and say, I lost? And then he gets personal, Nick Fuentes. He said, it would have been good to know before 1,600 people got charged. It would have been good to know that before I had all my money frozen, before I was put on the no-fly list, before I got banned from everything, lost my banking and payment processing. Just feels like a big ripoff. It just goes to show what a tremendous betrayal Trump is. It's just like a callous indifference to the sacrifices that his supporters made on his behalf. Poor Nick. These people, they should have known that Trump was lying to them about losing the election in 2020. They should have known. He lies about everything. I mean, the Washington Post documented 30,000 lies while he was president. I'm just astonished that Nick Fuentes, who seems like a smart guy, but hey, Hitler-loving, racist, misogynistic, anti-Semite, must just be astonishingly stupid. And it's finally dawning on him. Thank goodness. I'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Oklahoma schools are in revolt. I'll tell you about that and pick up your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism.
There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen, and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Ittner has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskenson Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism, bureaucratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station.
The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome, Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out.
I hear the chatter, I see the screens. A world divided, it seems. Voices shouting truth obscured, but in my heart, I'm reassured.
Welcome back. So in Oklahoma, the school district, the state superintendent of schools, his name is Ryan Walters. He has required that the individual superintendents of schools, or the principals, I guess they call them, and the superintendents of school districts make sure that every teacher is teaching the Bible in their classrooms in the elementary schools of Oklahoma. Now, here's the problem that they're running into. Most of these teachers are Christians. In fact, probably, well, I don't even want to guess, but a very, very high percentage of them are Christian. I mean, a very high percentage of Americans are Christians. And there's like all these different varieties of Christianity. So what part of the Bible are you going to teach? And what do you think about the teacher down the hall teaching some part of the Bible that you don't agree with? Or an interpretation of some part of the Bible that you don't? I mean, this is open to a huge can of worms. And so what's happening is individual school districts and superintendents of schools are starting to say, no, don't do this. This is just going to be a mess. The superintendent of the Mid-Dell public school system in Oklahoma, his name is Rick Cobb. He came out and he said, no, don't do it. He told his principals and his teachers not to teach the Bible. And he said, I'm not losing sleep over thinking about how Walters might retaliate. I'll address it when it comes up. He's so unpredictable. Everything out of the State Department is so unpredictable right now that I think you just have to address things as they happen and not anticipate them. But he says that, Walters, now the state superintendent who's saying you must teach the Bible, he says this is in the best interest of educating children. He said, we want our kids here in Oklahoma to understand American history better than any in the country, and we're laying out a roadmap for every state to follow. Teach the Bible and understand American history? Interesting. Earlier this year, Forbes magazine did a survey of educational status. How are schools doing state by state across the United States, all 50 states? And guess who placed at the bottom? With only 26% of fourth graders being proficient in math. 24% being proficient in reading. About only a quarter of their students are competent at math and reading in the lowest ranked state in the union, and that state would be, you guessed it, Oklahoma. And, their superintendent of instruction seemed to think that, that's going to solve the problem. Let's just teach the Bible. Amazing. All right, well, so what's on your mind today? Mark in South Bend, Indiana. Hey, Mark, what's up?
How you doing? I got three quick things. One, you talked about 2 weeks ago, the riot insurrection. 20% of the rioters were associated with law enforcement in this country. That's not surprising to me, Tom. You got to remember, one of the rioters was a full-time Marine who was on leave. He was in regular civilian clothes. He was an active duty Marine on leave, and one was a Chicago policeman who lived at home with his parents also. And the other thing is, you were talking yesterday about when the Republican and Democratic Party wasn't so out of kilter, and there wasn't such, Republicans just hitting below the belt constantly. And you mentioned Newt Gingrich on that, and Murdoch, who was behind. I want to mention one. I want to mention the Godfather, Richard Milhouse Nixon. His congressional race in 1946, when he first ran for Congress against George Voorhees, I believe the gentleman was, he went and hit low on everything he could. Then he ran for Senate in 1950 against a lady named Helen Brown. And Nixon went on to say, not only is she a pinko commie, she's pink right down to her underwear. And he is the king of dirty campaigning.
Yep.
And it kind of migrated from that. And the last thing I want to bring up, there are 42 different Bibles also. So which Bible you can pick first of all? And
You
the
mean
last
different
thing
versions,
is,
like the New International Version, the King James Version? Yeah, okay.
yeah, you got the Quran, you got the
those are
the Book of Abraham.
They're requiring that the Christian Bible be taught in Oklahoma.
Right. And the last thing is I know this is putting the horse before the cart, but a potential cabinet post for Kamala Harris when she wins, I would say for Chief of Staff Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah. I think that might be what's the word on? That might be I think he would do better in a more powerful position, frankly. Although Chief of Staff has a lot of power, basically they're a fancy calendar keeper and gatekeeper. And although they can play an advisory role, Rahm Emanuel certainly did for Obama. Interesting. Let me think about that one, Mark. That's interesting. Thank you. Good points all. Appreciate it. Joe, speaking of Oklahoma, Joe in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, just real quickly on the education thing. We used to have kind of a purpley state here, and we had Brad Henry as a governor who was a Democrat. Did a fantastic job. The balance between taxes and everything was really fair. And then, because of the Fox News swill machine and all the other stuff, we ended up turning into just every county voted for ex-President Trump. And when the Republicans took over, the first thing they did, you guessed it, the trickle-down, massive, and it's all about fairness. One size finally fits all. When everybody got a 5% tax cut, of course, most of that, if you make more money, 5% is going to be a real good gig. Right. And then they paid for it by not giving the teachers a raise for 10 years until they went on strike. These people are absolutely monsters, just like Trump and the Republican Party now as far as tax. They basically push the Bible candy out the front door while they shovel the wealth of the state or the nation out the back door. That's how they operate. Real quickly on the Supreme Court people, I say impeach them based on perjury, because every one of them said that Roe was double stare decisis. Yeah. So they were lying under oath. I say impeach them for perjury would be a good first step. As far as Nick Fuentes.
Yeah, by the way, before you move on to Nick, if I could just insert something here, because I haven't mentioned it, and it is newsworthy. We now have a recording of a fellow reading an email from Ginny Thomas thanking this group for fighting against ethics reforms for the Supreme Court. She and her husband are arguably the most corrupt people who have ever been even close to the Supreme Court. Her husband is the most corrupt Supreme Court justice in the history of America, will go down in history as such, and was the deciding vote in a whole bunch of things, like Citizens United, for example, which has totally corrupted America. So I just wanted that on the record, Joe.
Yeah. I believed Anita, for the record.
Yeah, and Anita Hill was absolutely right. She's been on this program twice. She's brilliant. She's got a great autobiography out.
But anyhow, you had a...
Nick Fuentes.
Yeah.
Nick Fuentes, real quick. I think maybe he's been taking a little bit of that Russian cash, and so now he can go, I wasn't pro-Trump the whole time. Trump is now finally admitting he lost by a whisker because he knows in the debate they're going to say, did you win 2020? Now he can walk that back.
Right.
So these are people that are just paid liars, and they're hedging. My last point, Kamala can't move anybody during this debate because Trump's going to do his leaf blower of lies, and he's going to be better coached this time going in. And we watched Kerry and Gore versus Bush, and anybody with a functioning brain would have never voted Bush after those debates, but we already know the other side has a lot of dysfunctional brains and a lot of misinformation that's feeding their thinking.
That's right.
So here's the point I did actually call about. I think Kamala is messing up, to some degree, how she's carrying on her rallies. And the reason I say that is there's some key issues and points that she's not making. One, on immigration. She should remind everyone in that audience Trump is planning on using the U.S. military to round up immigrants.
She does. She mentions that.
That Trump took babies from the arms of mothers.
She mentions that. And she mentions that he killed the border reform bill that Jim...
that's definitely a great one.
From Wyoming, yeah.
He also wants to take away birthright citizenship. I mean, these should be pile-driven. Now, lastly, on the campaign stops, she's not doing good enough about the one issue we don't have a silver bullet for, and that's inflation. Yes, it's down, but people know over the last
inflation is below 3% now. I mean, you know, which is within the. I mean, Ronald Reagan never got inflation below 4.1% ever in his entire 8 years, and nobody says, Reagan. No, I get your point, Joe. I'm sorry, I got to move along now, but thank you for the call. Excellent points, all. Susan in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Susan, what's up?
Hi. I just wanted to make a comment about our friend down in Florida, Governor DeSantis, and the scandal going on with his state's Department of Parks to work with his cronies to develop 9 of the state parks into golf courses and resort hotels, and how the employee, the cartographer for the Department of Parks who blew this up by telling the Tampa Times, got fired. And happy to report that his GoFundMe page that somebody set up for him has now collected twice what his public salary would have been if he'd stayed employed. But this is just so sick. And then just one more thing I wanted to touch on, the passing of Jane McElvey, the labor organizer, in July, and how she has a series of books that can help people work through their mobilization efforts, because she was a very successful union organizer.
And you find her books how?
Jane McElvey, McAlevey.
Okay.
Just look up her name. There's all 5 of them right there.
Great. Okay. Susan, thank you. Thank you so much. It's always nice hearing from you. Appreciate it. It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And the debate is in 5 days. Are you ready? It's going to get wild. I'll be right back with your calls. Welcome back. Monica in Chireno, Texas. Hey, Monica. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Love your broadcast. You started off by immigrants, and I have to tell you a quick one. We left Germany, and I became a citizen in 1973. And that certificate never left my side because I was so proud to be an American, a citizen. When I went to DMV to renew my license in July, they said, oh, we see you were born in Germany. Are you a citizen? And I said, yes. Here's my certificate. I showed it to them. They took a picture on the computer, and they said, well, you see these numbers on that certificate? They're much lower. And I said, well, yeah, I became a citizen in 1973. Well, we have to confirm that.
Oh, geez.
This was in July. Now, I live in Texas.
Right.
That should tell you everything you want to know.
Right. Plus, if after they've confirmed your citizenship, you can then register to vote at the same time through the DMV, correct, in Texas?
No. Well,
so
at any rate,
maybe they're trying to prevent you from voting.
Yeah, this was on July 9th.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the Inspector General because, trying to find a certificate from 51 years ago is not going to be easy.
Right.
Now where are we? It's almost 2 months. I got a notification saying it would be another 40 days before I hear anything. And by then, I won't be able to vote.
Yep. Surprise, surprise. Have you ever applied for a U.S. passport?
Oh, yes. But that expired because I never want to leave this country. I love the United
you should renew your passport and just use that as your ID.
Well, they said it doesn't matter.
Oh, really? They won't accept a passport as proof of citizenship?
Nope. I had an old passport. I had two of them, when I first came to the United States. But it's been canceled because I haven't renewed it. But at any rate, I am so angry what's going on in the state of Texas. Yeah. FYI, I also sent you an email a little while ago. Hunter Biden's attorney filed an Alfred B for him today.
Which is I am pleading guilty, but I'm not asserting my guilt.
Is that what that means?
Yes.
I didn't know.
Yeah, it means I will accept whatever punishment you give me, but I'm still not saying that I did it.
I'll be damned.
Yeah.
Well, I just want you to know I won't be able to vote probably. I can't believe it.
It's because, it's amazing because you live in Texas. It's
don't move to Texas, anybody.
Yeah. Monica, you should write your story up and post it over on Daily Kos.
Oh, I don't even know what Daily Kos is.
Daily Kos is one of the 2 or 3 largest progressive websites in America. dailykos.com is the website. And you can create a membership for free, and you can post a message there at no cost. And if it's well written, and and I'm guessing you probably would write it well, it can pop up to the top 10 or 15 and stay there for a day or two, and literally millions of people will see it. So I would encourage you to tell your story over there. Monica, I got to run, but thank you for the story. That's amazing. Thank you. It's 51 minutes past and that's exactly what I was talking about, by the way. It's 51 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. When Ronald Reagan took over America in 1981, we handed him a brand gleaming new country. Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, Jack Kennedy, they had built America. We had brand new schools, brand new hospitals, brand new interstate highway systems, brand new airports, infrastructure. We were the envy of the world. And then Republicans came along and they said, well, you just cut the top tax rate from 74% down to 27% and everything will trickle down. Instead, what do we get? Billionaires and poverty. They said, hey, just deregulate guns, and an armed society is a polite society. Instead, we've got more school shootings than anywhere in the world. They said, just kill off civics and history classes in our schools, and it'll liberate our young people to focus on science and math. Now we've got people who don't know how our government works. I mean, it just goes on from there. There's a whole rant about it over at HartmannReport.com titled FDR Saved America, Then the GOP Ripped Us Apart. Check it out.
It's like a battlefield. With lines drawn in the sand and shields that never yield. It's always us against them in this endless fight. But in the clouds clash of colors. We lose the shades of right. The media makes it my team, your team. But there's more to see in the American dream. It's about the deeper issues, the big picture view. We need to find a common ground between me and you.
Welcome back. 53 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Andre in Chicago. Hey, Andre, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
Good. What's on your mind?
Hey, I want to address the issues that you spoke of today. First thing I wanted to say was that I do believe that for the Democrats, they need to just be truthful about why Donald Trump lost. See, to me, it's not enough to just say, well, it was the most fair election in history. They need to point out that Donald Trump lost because of his policies and people voted against him, and that there was no way that somebody could plant 3 million votes for Joe Biden against him.
Yeah.
See, and I think that would help the public because they're not pointing out exactly why he lost.
Yeah, good point. By the way, it was 3 million in 2016 that he lost by. He lost by 7 million in 2020.
Yeah, exactly, Tom. And last thing that I think is noteworthy, Tom, under Donald Trump, we had 3 government shutdowns, and the longest one under Trump was 35 days. You never had not one government shutdown under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, not one.
Yep.
And Trump let the government shut down because he wanted money for that border wall. So I think we need to remember that when we go to the polls, that this man let the government shut down, that Donald Trump did.
You're right. And it was I believe it was the longest shutdown in American history, wasn't it, Andre?
It was. Yeah, it was. It was.
That's
the
what I
longest,
thought.
35 days.
Yep. There you go. There you go. Andre, thank you. Go ahead.
And the second was Rand Paul. Rand Paul let the government shut down too under Donald Trump.
Yeah. No, he helped lead the charge. Yeah, you brought the goods, Andre. Thank you very much. That was a good one. Susan in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Hey, Susan, what's up?
Hey, good to see you. I'm a recovering fundamentalist.
Uh-huh.
And I am very happy to be here. Welcome or hello from the land of where every schoolroom has the 10 Commandments posted, thanks to Jeff Landry, our governor.
Oh, my.
But the actual... Yeah, they have. Jeff, and now he's doing another thing, but he's an idiot. So anyway, I called because one of the things, I have a brother who's 100% Trump. He's got banners out in front of his house with the Rambo body with Trump's head on it. You know, he's part of the cult.
Yeah.
And one of the things he said about the whole abortion thing is that, well, you know, states can decide. Well, that's all well and good. And this is one thing I know all of you guys know that are, you know, that research these things. But I've never heard any people know the fact that there are 24 states in the United States that cannot put forth a referendum. In Louisiana, I cannot collect 1 million signatures and say, I want to put this on the ballot.
That's true.
The only way it can get on the ballot is through the legislature.
That's right.
And, of course, our legislature is hardcore, which, of course, the response was, well, then you just, you know, you vote in people that'll do it. Well, that's great if we weren't gerrymandered to hell and back again.
Yep. Yeah, you've even had a Democrat as a governor, isn't John Bell Edwards, wasn't he a Democrat? Wasn't he your governor, or am I thinking of another state?
He was, and you know what? He vetoed every damn thing he could, and I tell you what, Tim Walz is like John Bell Edwards reincarnated. I'm so excited because I love John Bell.
Well, hopefully you can get another Democrat as a governor at least. Because that's the only way to get around the gerrymandering. Susan, I'm sorry I'm out of time, but I got to run. But thank you for the call. I look forward to future conversations. Thank you. It's the top of the hour. We'll be back with Phil Ittner live from Ukraine on the other side of this break, and then back to your calls. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from Chapter 1, The Power of Data. In November 2017, my Apple MacBook Pro was stolen. It happened on the island of Ibiza, where I was visiting my friend, a documentary filmmaker. We were thinking of making a series of short films to illustrate innovative uses of new technology around the world. We sat together writing down examples of technological innovation, subversion, and creativity we'd already witnessed. We discussed themes I explore in this book, such as surveillance, the gig economy, and the future of work, artificial intelligence, and cryptocurrencies. After uploading our ideas to Google's cloud-based storage platform, Google Drive, we took a short break, locking our laptops in the trunk of our rented car. When we returned, both laptops were gone. Although upset, I was also relieved. I'd be able to recover most of my data because almost all of it was in the cloud. That was what I signed on to when I stored my files with Google as well as with Apple, Microsoft, and Dropbox. But in the bargain, I'd allowed them to profit from my data. It dawned on me, given the terms of service I'd agreed to, that the value of the data of my data to the storage companies was far greater than the value of my laptop to the thief. How many of us are fully aware that companies providing us with cloud storage have ways to monetize our data? They use targeted advertising, for instance, and charge fees once we get hooked on the security and peace of mind that their free services offer. We put faith in these companies to store our files securely, but our private information may no longer remain private if, let's say, the government asks to search through our data. It's also not private because all this data is surveilled, computed, and often manipulated in mysterious ways to influence and shape our behaviors as these corporations see fit. By creating accounts with these companies, we give them access to ourselves. So when we consent to privacy policies, in reality, we're signing on to systems of surveillance never before seen in human history, and we do so without being included or consulted. By desiring to keep our data accessible and recoverable, we lock ourselves into using their services. As I thought about getting my files back in Ibiza, I wondered, does access to my own property have to come with such strings attached? In my relationship to Apple, I find the strings impossible to untie. By purchasing an Apple laptop, I had unwittingly transformed from a customer into a part of the company's product line. I had provided Apple with private data and trusted Apple to protect it. Now, to retrieve that data, I had to purchase a new laptop with Apple-owned peripherals and devices. So I caught the next flight to Madrid. I then took the train to the city's Apple store located in Puerto del Sol. In many ways, this central plaza still serves in its centuries-old role as a landmark and gathering place for the entire Spanish nation, a point from which numerous roads emanate. With its distinctive aesthetic and its strategic placement in a civic space, The Apple Store stood out among the adjacent parliamentary and government buildings as if the global brand were more powerful than Spain itself. The day I was there, more people entered and left the Apple Store than passed through the doors of my neighboring building. In 2017, Apple, a private corporation worth more than $1 trillion, actually began to conceptualize its retail stores as town squares, thereby branding itself an integral part of our everyday lives. Other big technology corporations describe themselves in similar terms. Facebook CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, refers to the company as a social infrastructure for the global community. So what we have in the digital world are privately owned public spheres. They're branded as public, civic, and virtuous, but in reality are dominated by a single logic, extending profitability and economic value. How can these companies' interests be the same as the public interest? Like many other large corporations, Apple is shareholder-owned and therefore primarily accountable to its investors and executives, rather than to its employees, customers, or the general public. I had not begun to unpack the meaning of all this until I realized how monumental the Puerto del Sol Apple Store actually was, as an icon and a structure. As I walked into the store, an Apple employee invited me to purchase a new machine, log onto my iCloud account, and retrieve from Apple Cloud Storage the data that I lost from my stolen laptop. These transactions, completed in less than an hour, were simple and efficient. My data was extraterritorial, easily retrievable in Spain, and likely would be in most other countries. Purchasing a new laptop and getting my data back supported Apple's economic model. National borders were no threat or hindrance. The same was true with retrieving data I had stored on other corporate cloud servers managed by Google and Dropbox. In technology circles, this saying has made the rounds. If you're not the customer, then you're the product. Many of today's technologies come to us for free, but in return, our personal lives come for free to these technologies. But they are accessible for the company's profit and gain. Yes, when we search Google, we look for information, but do we realize that Google is also searching us? Users, and it goes on from there. So the book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, our good friend Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent based out of Kyiv, Ukraine, host of the brilliant On the Edge podcast, which you can find wherever fine podcasts are available. He also has a video blog over on YouTube. Just plug in his name, Philip Ittner, Philipittner, and you'll get it. Ittner Philip, his name backwards is his Twitter handle. Phil, welcome back to the program. It seems like there's been a lot of news coming out of Ukraine recently, including capturing Russian territory and Russia just bombing the crap out of you guys. How are you holding up and what's up?
Well, you're right. Unfortunately, they have been, as you say, bombing the crap out of us. We've been hit quite hard in Poltava. There's a kind of a military school or institution there. We're looking at over 50 dead there. We're looking at also, double digits dead in the western city of Lviv. And we're getting it every day here in the capital, here in Kyiv. So it's nonstop attacks on us, but also obviously these announcements of what is happening in the United States, indicating that the attacks are not just here physically in Ukraine, but there are attacks in terms of information warfare going on in the United States.
Yep. Big bust of these folks who were previously associated with RT
which is no longer broadcasted in the United States, but apparently, all around the rest of the world. And they're, it's pretty grim stuff, Phil. I agree.
Well, I mean, it's nothing new to those of us who have kept a keen eye on information warfare that's been coming out of Ukraine. Yeah. The idea that millions of dollars are being spent in the information warfare that's happening in the United States, where we see folks who will regurgitate information, coming out of Russia, putting into our body politic. That's to those of us who have been paying attention to it, that's nothing new.
Yeah, no, and we've got a bunch of Republican politicians now who are repeating Russian talking points verbatim, constantly. Rand Paul I'd put at the top of that list, but even J.D. Vance now, the vice presidential candidate, is repeating Russian talking points. It's terrible. So to Ukraine, I understand that you guys only had the Ukrainian Air Force only has 6 F-16s and 1 crashed, and you lost a pilot last week. Did we talk about this last week, or has this happened since you and I last spoke?
No, that was last week, and we continue to have air defense issues. The Russians continue to attack us with a lack of air defense. Look, I mean, we have a lot, but it's not sufficient. And you can protect the capital, you can protect Odessa, but the issue is other towns like Poltava, which just lost, 50 plus human beings and, hundreds injured.
Right. Many of them children.
Including children, children. And we can look at Lviv, where tragically an entire family was decimated. Had they had Patriot systems, maybe that wouldn't have happened. So it's not just the capital and the major cities like Odessa that matter. We have to have air defense throughout the country, because they're literally trying to effect ethnic cleansing here, and and also bringing it back to the effect of what they're doing internationally when it comes to information warfare. This is all-encompassing attack on the West. It is not isolated to Ukraine. It is happening in the United States. It is happening throughout the West. And the sooner that the acknowledgement that this is a war that isn't just limited to Ukraine, perhaps the better we can come to defending the West.
Yeah, with regard to the air defense, I think most Americans don't realize that Ukraine is the physically largest country in Europe. It's the size of Texas. And protecting a country that size is a major undertaking, and they need a hell of a lot more help to do it, number one. Number two, to your point of information warfare, not just limited to, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance helping Russia here in the United States. In East Germany, I used to live in Germany, and in fact, I lived on the East German border. And the East has always been very kind of culturally conservative, but Putin used to run that part of Germany, and he speaks fluent German. And we just had this election where the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland party, did really, really well in these eastern counties. And I'm thinking that the reason they did so well, when you look at the issues that they're talking about, which are principally, anti-gay, anti-immigrant, that kind of culture war stuff, that I'm seeing the fingerprints of Russian propaganda all over this, that Russia has had a huge influence, just like they did in England when Russian trolls helped Brexit to happen. What do you think about that?
Oh, 100%. I think that the primary attack that Russia inflicts upon the West is sow and divide. whether it is Brexit or whether it is the AfD or whether it is Donald Trump, frankly, their intent is to divide us, and to, in so doing, not be able to focus our attack on the threat that they pose, whether it is here in Ukraine, and obviously the Ukrainian war is their primary focus, but it is also to divide and conquer internally within Western liberal democracies in Europe, but also the transatlantic division. And, you know, they, if you listen to them, they'll be very actually quite open about this. Why it is that we in the West continue to ignore what they themselves say their intent is very frustrating for those who are here in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's problematic. You're one of the most thoughtful and well-informed observers of the scene there. You know, particularly of Russia's role in with right-wing politics and all this kind of stuff. But just what Russia's up to, and I know you speak Russian, I believe, and
badly.
Yeah, but your Russian's probably like my German, but we can both get around in those languages. So last week I was seeing reports, and I think I mentioned to you that in June, Louise and I were in both Latvia, Estonia, Finland, and Sweden. And what we heard in every single country was that they are all scared to death, particularly Latvia and Estonia, of Russian invasion. And at the time, and multiple people told me this everywhere I went, I kind of thought, I think that's pretty unlikely. But then last week, there were these reports that some of the people close to Putin are talking about that NATO just doesn't have the courage to respond, and that they should make some small incursions into either Estonia or Latvia, or maybe Lithuania. Keep in mind, these are relatively small countries. Latvia only has 5 million people. I don't know the population of Estonia, but I believe it's under 6 million. Make some small incursions into their eastern borders, and just see what kind of response it provokes. And if it doesn't provoke a big response, then just invade the damn countries. And that would solve his Ukraine problem. It would divert the attention away from what's going on in Ukraine. What do you think of that?
I think the possibility of them actually invading the Baltics is more in terms of a larger geopolitical war than I think they themselves think that they can tackle. But they can threaten the Baltics, and that will make the West think twice about what they do. Much of what Moscow threatens is not actually what they intend to do, but more in terms of frightening the West, so that they don't stand strong with a stiff spine, because they know they can't take on.
Well, it seems like this kind of threat would actually cause us to be more aggressive in support of Ukraine as a blocking procedure.
If they were to actually invade or make some sort of infiltration, whatever it is, into the Baltics, yes, absolutely.
They're doing digital warfare there right now, by the way. You know that, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely, 100%. And they test this theory. They are constantly pushing the envelope as to what they can do without a Article 5 reaction.
Right.
They know that if there's an Article 5, that they will be in serious trouble. They can't take on Ukraine, much less the might of the entire NATO bloc. So they're pushing the boundaries of this. If they were to actually do something which was undeniably an aggressive act against the Baltics, it would call into question Article 5. And to call into question Article 5 is basically to question whether or not the NATO alliance itself has any strength to it.
Right.
Resolve. Yeah, and of course, obviously, if Donald Trump goes back into the Oval, that will, a threat to Article 5 will be even more.
I think that would precipitate an invasion of the Baltics, frankly. What do you think?
That's right. That's absolutely right. So
maybe this is prep for the Trump presidency that they're trying to help make happen.
Potentially, yes. Yeah, absolutely. They're threatening us. They're constantly threatening us.
Yeah.
This information warfare that's happening right now, when we look at Tenet media, where it's all these guys, the Tim Pools and what have you, that is an overture to an information warfare attack, and how we respond to it is will decide whether or not there will be more.
There you go.
Of these kinds of information attacks from the
great Phil Ittner. You can check out his On the Edge podcast. Hang on just a second here, Phil. I'm going to get stepped on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There we go. Phil, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always informative. Thank you so much.
And you, Tom.
Thank you. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Julia in Ada, Oklahoma. Hey, Julia, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, watching you on Free Speech TV, and it's refreshing that you're able to have so many people that are so insightful and not afraid to look at a broad picture. I have one comment for my friend Joe, my fellow Oklahoman. He mentioned the birthright thing. That I remember a review of Trump Hotel hosting pregnant Russian citizens who were having their babies here with his help at their birthing center in order for their children to be birthright children. And they interviewed some of the mothers, and this was quite some time ago. I don't even remember, I think during his presidency. And so I just wanted to mention that, and for people to consider, what does that mean if he's against birthrights, but Putin is paying these women to have their babies in order to get U.S. birthright? Is there a conflict there within his relationship?
This was in 2018, and PBS did a show on this. It's titled "Russian Birth Tourism at Trump Properties," and wow, I did not know about this. This is pretty amazing. There's a whole segment on it, and I'd have to. It's a video clip from Southern California PBS. But if you just Google Trump Hotel pregnant Russian women, it pops right up. Russians flock to Trump properties to give birth to U.S. citizens. Wow. I had no idea. Or if I did, I'd forgotten. The framing of this on these stories is that it is wealthy Russians who are doing this because they want their children to have the advantage of having both a Russian and a U.S. passport, so that they can more easily travel the world as they grow up and become adults, rather than for some reason, Julia, you keep popping back on hold. I don't know if Jeremy is doing something in there or what. The system is weird.
I just wanted to mention that, and I think it deserves some scrutiny. But my major question is the result of an interview. A journalist asked Donald Trump how he was going to vote on the abortion issue on November 5th in the main election, where it's on the ballot in Florida. Trump is a convicted felon in another state. Can he vote in Florida?
Yes.
And if he does, are they going to arrest him?
No, in Florida you can vote. You cannot vote if you were convicted by a Florida court. But if you were convicted of a felony by a court in another state, you can vote. Which is why it's so weird that Jeb Bush purged 90,000 mostly African American and Hispanic voters off the rolls because they had similar names to felons from Texas, because those were all people convicted in Texas. I mean, he shouldn't have even been able to do that. But Trump will be able to vote in Florida.
But if Oklahoma convicted felons can't vote here, and they could move to Florida and establish residency and vote there, right?
Apparently, that's the law. Yeah, that's my understanding.
It's a great idea.
Julie, I got to run, but thank you for the call. And thanks for the tip on the Trump property. That's amazing. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Human beings have a couple of unique characteristics. The first is that we can be very tender and loving and concerned and caring toward people we perceive as being our group, us. We can also be extraordinarily violent against people that we consider to be them, if we think of them or this other as a threat. Probably the classic example of this is Adolf Hitler convincing Germans that, Jews were a threat to them and good Germans going along with the Holocaust. Well, this othering is built into our DNA. This is, ancient stuff. And the Republican Party, since the time of Nixon, when he started, picking up the white racist vote after Democrats laid it down in the 60s, the Republicans have been using this to try to other minorities in America as a political strategy. And this is really deadly stuff. There's a whole op-ed about it over at HartmannReport.com. Is othering human nature's deadliest instinct? Check it out.
In the heart of the city, out in the countryside.
Welcome back. Picking up your calls here 24 minutes past the hour. Matt in Spokane, Washington. Hey, Matt, what's up?
Hey, good morning. I just want to make a couple observations about the Arlington incident. And I kind of speak...
Which has sadly fallen off the radar screen of the media. I think, the Trump now yesterday denied that it even happened, which should have started the whole thing all over again. But I think the media has decided to give him a pass on it. Go back to you, Matt.
Yeah, I guess until we get more video from the security cameras at Arlington, which we haven't seen yet. But it's very interesting as I observe people attacking Biden and blaming Biden for the deaths of these 12 soldiers, just ad nauseum. And, I came up after Vietnam, and I was in the service and stuff. And I can tell you that during those times, people were upset with presidents when their sons were killed in battle. And that's nothing new. I can't imagine how many people didn't like Nixon for Vietnam. But we generally kept that pretty private to respect, for reverence and all that stuff. It wasn't politicized.
Yep.
And, so I think that's kind of misguided a little bit.
It's misguided a lot. I mean, the guy who blew himself up was one of the 5,000 Taliban people that Donald Trump released from prison when he cut a deal with the Taliban to stop shooting at Americans. He also released from prison the guy who's currently running Afghanistan, who's a vicious murderer. He also cut a deal with the Taliban that he would shut down 9 of the 10 U.S. Air Force bases just a couple of months before Joe Biden took over the White House in order to make it even harder for Biden to withdraw U.S. forces and make it almost impossible to withdraw all of our military hardware from Afghanistan. Trump sabotaged Biden's ending the war in Afghanistan. He did it intentionally. He did it in collaboration with the Taliban. And Trump, you don't want to politicize these things. I will. Trump is responsible for the death of those 12 soldiers, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And what's the difference between the first Afghanistan death, the 100th Afghanistan death, the 500th, the 800th, or the 12th? I mean, they're all the result of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney's lies to begin with. Yeah. I mean, they lied about they lied about Iraq, but Afghanistan also. The Washington Post reported right after 9/11 that Afghanistan offered to arrest bin Laden and turn him over to a third country for prosecution. And George Bush said, no, we'd rather go to war, because he had told Mickey Herskowitz in 1999, his biographer, that if he became president, he wanted to have a war in the Middle East because that's how you get reelected. You become a wartime president. It's insane. Matt, I got to run, but I'm sorry. Thank you for your comments. Spot on. Well said. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after this. Stay tuned.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They're about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Schukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them, he in them, and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. and he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Study.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. So have you noticed that the Republicans are pretty much not talking about a constitutional convention anymore? They used to be gung-ho to rewrite the Constitution. You know, they wanted to put corporate personhood in there. They wanted to change it so that women can't vote. They wanted to do away with the election of senators, repeal the 17th Amendment, take us back to them being appointed by the states. They had all these weird, they wanted to outlaw labor unions. All these weird ideas, but they've stopped talking about it. I mean, they're still moving forward on it, but it's not. Project 2025, for example, you know, their ultimate talking document does not have one single mention in it about a constitutional convention. Why would that be? Well, it's because the Supreme Court is doing their work for them. I mean, you know, just they have overturned Article 2. They've overturned the 1st, 4th, 9th, and 14th Amendments. They've overturned Article 1, Section 7. All the details of this whole thing are over at hartmannreport.com. You got to check it out.
In a world where truth is fading, lies become the new sensation. Repeat them till they're real, a twisted kind of revelation. From the days of Goebbels' whispers to the modern day charade, politicians spin their stories in this deceitful masquerade.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the... Yep, don't listen to Fox so-called news. I'll tell you, 35 minutes past the hour. Just a couple of quick news things here, and then I want to pick up your calls. The mother of the Georgia shooter in the school yesterday. By the way, this was the, what was the number, Sean? 8? This is the 8th school shooting this year, this school year. And this school year is 3 days old. It's just the largest one, right? But the mother of this 14-year-old, her name is Marcy Gray. She has been prosecuted for, or has faced prosecution on allegations of domestic violence, drug possession, property damage, and traffic violations in Barrow, Fulton, and Forsyth counties. Faced civil fraud charges related to writing a $10,000 bad check to get a car and then driving the car off the lot. Her 14-year-old son is expected to be charged as an adult in this murder. Mom was arrested back just in November of last year on suspicion of possession of methamphetamine, fentanyl, and muscle relaxants. And she also concealed the identity of her vehicle with a tag belonging to another car, probably because the dealer was saying, hey, you know, she wrote us a bum check. And this is a family that had no problem buying an AR-15. Something's wrong with that, you know? Something that's just fundamentally wrong with that. Finally, just a quick story. This is from Arwa Madawi in The Guardian. And the headline, yes, it sounds like a conspiracy, but maybe our phones really are listening to us. You know, we all have had this experience, or most of us have had this experience, of talking about something, and then you pick up your phone and look at a, you know, Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and there's an ad for the thing you were just talking. This happened to Louisa and me just a week ago. And, we were talking about taking a vacation, I forget where, but I picked up my phone and opened some, I don't recall the website, and there was an ad for that particular location. And I'm like, this is spooky. Well, here it is. 404 Media, which is a tech-focused news site, recently got a hold of a pitch deck. Now, a pitch deck is what, when a company's rolling out a product, they put together basically kind of a PowerPoint presentation about that product. And this is one from Cox Media Group. Now, Cox Media Group is huge. They own radio and television stations and I believe newspapers all over the country. They're big. And they sell, and they've got an advertising sales branch that is huge. If my recollection is correct, fact check me on that. But I'm pretty certain. I used to live in Atlanta, and Cox owned, the biggest radio and TV stations in the city. So I'm assuming this is the same company, CMG, Cox Media Group. And this pitch deck was for their new product. It was called Active Listening Software. And it said, what would it mean? This is from their website, from CMG's website. Now, they've deleted it since this story came out, but this was on their website. What would it mean if you could target potential clients who are actively discussing their need for your services in their day-to-day conversations? No, it's not a Black Mirror episode. It's Voice Data. Voice Data is the brand name of this product, where they install this software on your phone, apparently, or your smart TV. Most people don't realize that the TV in their house has both a camera and a microphone on it. Many of them do. Or your computer. And it listens to you constantly and then serves ads based on what it hears. Now, immediately after this story came out, they call it the power of voice and our devices' microphones. And in the pitch deck, it had a picture of a person looking at their smartphone. Right? After the story came out, Google, Facebook, and Amazon all basically said, we're not doing that. Nope, not us. We're not doing that. Not a chance. Amazon said it's never worked with Cox Media Group. Google removed them from their partners program. And Meta, which owns Facebook, said it's investigating. Pretty weird stuff. But the fact that somebody was advertising a product to, this was business-to-business advertising. They weren't advertising to you and me that they can listen to us on our phones. They were, advertising to potential advertisers, companies that make their money on advertising, like Google and Facebook and whatnot. So we'll see where this goes. But remember when a couple of years ago, Mark Zuckerberg, he had a laptop and somebody noticed that he had a little miniature Band-Aid taped over the camera? Now you know why. All right, let's pick up your calls. What's on your mind today? Steve in Ventura County, California. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks so much for taking my call. I got to switch out of my multitasking role here. So to start with, I am subscribed to your ADHD blog. And my family is pretty deep into this issue. And personally, I've just learned a lot from it, so thank you.
You're welcome. It's hunterandafarmersworld.com for people who don't know what we're talking about.
Wow. I also saw your shared newsletter this morning talking about voter fraud. And I've worked 3 of the last 4 elections in our local county elections. Mm-hmm. So I know it from the inside, at least in our area. And so I started blogging about 2.5 months ago and did a series on what actually happens in an election. Mm-hmm. And I raised that simply because your blog talked about voter fraud. And voter fraud obviously creates a distrust in the system, which is the #1 tool in Trump's playbook. Right?
Yeah, and Putin's.
So, go ahead, Tom.
And Putin's.
Yeah. Well, and all of his cohorts. Yeah. So it basically gets his base riled up, right? And that's what he uses to keep doing his thing. But as we all know, voting is a state-by-state issue. And so Trump tends to paint the whole voting process with a wide brush, right? Yep. The point of my blog is very much what you've been saying, for decades now. Democracy is a participatory sport. Tag, you're it. So if people are willing to get involved, meaning if they're willing to be observers, if they're willing to even work in elections divisions, they get a chance to see what goes on. And they get to understand if the vote is really safe.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
and you can call your local Democratic Party and ask and tell them that you want to volunteer to be an election worker or an election observer, and they will give you the name and phone number of the person to contact at your local county or precinct or however it works in your particular state, and you can show up and be there and you know, be an advocate for democracy.
So, but it's not just the Democratic Party. It's a matter of calling your county and saying, hey, I got some time. I got 10 days on my hands that I would be willing to go and watch.
Yep.
And what that does is two things. First of all, the people that are believing the Kool-Aid, right, they're not going to do it. The hardcore MAGA people won't dig into it any deeper and become involved because it would challenge their beliefs. And they're not going to do that. But for rational people, if they see things presented about the internal control that happens in elections, they start to get a little more confidence in what's going on.
Here's the one thing that concerns me, Steve, and that is the counting of mail-in ballots, where you've got to match the signature on the envelope to the signature that the person laid down when they first registered to vote. I know that depending on how busy I am, my signature can look very, very different from moment to moment. And there's a lot of Republicans who are volunteering to check these signature matches in blue cities so that they can reject as many presumably Democratic ballots as possible. And if there's not, usually they try to have one Democrat and one Republican watching. So, you know, if they don't both agree that the signatures don't match, the vote doesn't get thrown out. But very often, there's not a Democrat sitting there. There's just the Republican, because the GOP has been actively recruiting people. They're trying to get 100,000 people to do this across the country to check these signature matches. And that is a...
I heard you say...
Go ahead.
Well, I heard you say that earlier, but that's a function of the state regulations and how the county administers their voting rolls. So in our county, in Ventura County, you can't have people coming off the street and volunteer to check signatures. You have to be an election worker. You have to be a sworn employee.
Right.
It's different in every state.
Oh, that's interesting, because in many of the states, you can simply volunteer. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah. Well, so my point is, you know, people need to be involved in the grassroots to see how things actually work.
Yeah.
And if they're not willing to do that, then oh well. You know, I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, I live in supposedly a blue county in a blue state, but honest to goodness, in March of this year, we had a county supervisor who was elected a year and a half prior, and he goes into the meeting one day in front of God and everybody.
Steve, I'm sorry, I'm out of time.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
My apologies, Steve. Always make your big point first. We'll be right back, 46 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Cece in Northbrook, Illinois. Hey, Cece, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call and giving us this opportunity.
Always a pleasure.
I wanted to comment on the Big Lie 2.0, the news feed that you send out every morning. It seems to me that is what you described as nothing but treason, although you never put treason in the news, in the writing. And it seems to me what's happening in the country is treason it's been normalized.
Yeah.
Including the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And so I would like to see us use the word treason a little bit more. And I really appreciate that veteran that called before, and I appreciate Phil Ittner for recognizing what happened at Arlington National Cemetery.
Yeah.
I've been there. I went there last November for the first time in my life. And I tell you, Tom, it knocked me literally on my butt.
Yeah.
I wept like a baby. I wept like a baby in that cemetery. I stood by Medgar Evers' grave, and I talked to him.
Yeah.
And when I left his grave, I went by I just so happened I went by Kennedy's grave and Bobby Kennedy's grave site. I got a chance to see the changing of the guard. It's such a sacred place. And I'm not mad at Trump for doing that because that's him. Well, I'm mad at are the people who invited him to do that and the people who allowed him to do that. And I'm also that sellout called Shady Vance or whatever the eyeliner, whoever he is, that wears the eyeliner and calls himself a vice presidential nominee for the Republican Party. He's a sellout.
Yep.
No veteran talks about another veteran the way he has. This country needs to get appalled. And I'm sickened by what happened at Arlington.
No, I'm with you.
You can hear the passion in my voice. I'm weeping right now. That hurts.
No, I get it. When I lived in D.C., I went down and walked, the Vietnam Memorial. I have friends who died in Vietnam, and I'm with you, CC. Back to you.
And so, but the main point I was just making, your article was right on point. I just wish you used the word. I wish everybody else would. Let's throw the word treason out on the conversation.
Yeah.
Because that's what's happening in this country, treason.
It's a tough word, CC, because it has generally a fairly specific meaning, which is giving aid and comfort to the enemy during a time of war. And you could argue that we've been at war for a long, long time. But
I went and looked. I looked up the definition, Tom. In fact, I Googled the definition to make sure I knew what I was talking about, and it appears to me right here in the definition, it says "or." It has an "or," overthrow the government. The crime of betraying the country, especially by attempting to kill a sovereign or overthrow the government.
Well, Trump tried that. You're right.
Yeah. So,
and the GOP is supporting him.
You got other calls, and I appreciate the work you're doing.
Well, thank you, CC. It's always good hearing from you, and I appreciate the call. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And thanks for watching us there on Free Speech TV. It's 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds, so please stay tuned. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truth, J.D. Vance would really rather you didn't know all about. I'll be right back with you. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. It's no coincidence that the time in Europe when the church ran the continent, from around the 5th century to around the 15th or 16th century, that 1,000-year period is referred to as the Dark Ages. This is what happens when religion controls politics, when religion controls the state, the nation, and every nation of Europe was controlled essentially by the Catholic Church during that period of time. It got busted up with the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. This was what the founders of this country very much knew about. George Washington refused to declare himself a Christian. Thomas Paine wrote an entire book embracing atheism. Ben Franklin fled Massachusetts as a teenager to escape the religious threats. And Thomas Jefferson went off on it regularly. There's a whole piece about how the Republicans are trying to impose a new dark age on America. It's all laid out, all the quotes and all the links over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
In a world that's often harsh, the nights can feel so long. There's a call within our hearts to make the weak feel strong. For the children, for the elders, for the ones who need a hand. Let's stand together side by side and help them understand. We are their voice, we are their light. We'll lift them up through darkest night.
52 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Jeff in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Nice to speak to you again. I'm in Texas, and I heard the lady call from Texas about her voter ID issue. Something that you probably didn't realize that she said, this isn't the main point though, sorry, is that her passport was expired, and they definitely won't take an expired passport as
Which is
ID.
crazy.
But when it comes...
It's the same thing with driver's licenses. If you want to vote, and this is, you know why they do this, Jeff? Because older people, because older people let their passports and their driver's licenses expire, and they don't want people on Social Security voting. That's why Republicans have, because hell, I got a driver's license or a passport, whether it's expired or not, it's proof that I'm a citizen.
Right.
Anyhow, back to you.
Well, yeah, no, sorry. But the other main point I wanted to make is that you were talking about disenfranchising women. Well, again, Texas is a voter ID state, and if your name does not match the voter rolls, you don't get to vote. Well, one of the things that they do is when you go get your driver's license, they put their maiden name as their middle name. And if you don't know that and register to vote that way, you go in there with your real middle name, and they won't let you vote because it doesn't match.
Really? Is this like a state law or a policy or what? Because it's what they put. I don't know. It's what they put on the driver's license. I couldn't. I'm not a lawyer, so I couldn't tell you if it's a law. That's funny. My mom.
I can tell you that they do it. My wife is her name is Terry Lynn and took my last name Worth, but her driver's license says Terry Jordan Worth, and she's been married before. So even it was Terry Stutzman, then Terry Worth. I mean Terry Jordan, then Terry Stutzman, Terry Worth. But her maiden name was Terry Jordan, so they have her driver's license says Terry Jordan Worth.
Wow,
and
yeah.
if she doesn't register that, again,
I wonder if that's
exactly like that.
I wonder if that was like a standard at one time, because my mom, everything legal that my mom ever did, her maiden name was Hammond, and so it was, Jean Hammond Hartmann on everything. And although Louise uses her middle name, she doesn't use her maiden name. So I don't get it.
Yeah, well,
that's crazy stuff.
I don't get it either.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Jeff, thank you for the information. We'll have to look into that.
Have a great day.
Yeah, good talking to you. Dwayne in Petaluma, California. Hey, Dwayne, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yes. Excuse me. On that topic about names, it's my understanding that the names of the in the Spanish culture is they list the mother's maiden name last, traditionally. So that, of course, creates a great amount of trouble when the police officer says, "What's your last name?" And if somebody who's from the Spanish culture gives their mother's maiden name,
instead of their father's name. Last name.
Instead of their father's family's last name, right. and so anyway, that tradition is carried on, and it's probably part of the scam they're using in Texas to keep people from voting. I assume that they will keep doing that until we tell them that they disqualify enough to drop themselves down one congressperson in the line of Congress people.
Right.
That is the number of people. The total population divided by the total number of Congress people and how many you need to get a congressman. Right. As soon as they can't cancel one congressperson on January 6th and say this state has one less electoral vote, it's when they start doing that the states will stop disqualifying blacks or
it's a shame. It's a shame apportionment is based on persons rather than voters. Because that would be a huge incentive for states. But what we really need is just a law that explicitly says, like the 1993 National Voter Registration Act says, that voting is a right, an absolute right, and shoves it down the throat of the Supreme Court.
And the southern states, all the states, but it's not. It is not just doing that. It is enforcing the 13th Amendment as well as the 14th I just mentioned. Enforcing the 13th Amendment that says you can't force women to have children. Involuntary servitude is prohibited. And the people who passed that knew very well how many children Thomas Jefferson
I'm with you, Dwayne.
fired.
I'm sorry I'm out of time, but I'm with you. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, We also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is In Defense of Public Service by Cedric L. Alexander. The subtitle is How 22 Million Government Workers Will Save Our Republic. This is from Chapter 1, Civil Servants and Servant Leaders. Unelected public servants are found at all levels of government, federal, state, and local. But the modern model for all is found in the federal employment systems. More specifically, it is in the concept and operation of the federal civil service system, which governs the appointment and tenure of most federal workers. Those who believe that the unelected federal bureaucracy is a deep state covertly dedicated to the overthrow of elected government see the civil service as a fundamentally unconstitutional innovation, a monster of very recent creation. Such demonizing mythology aside, the truth is that the origin of the unelected government is found in the Constitution, under Section 2 of Article 2. The article defines the powers of the executive branch, and the second paragraph of its Section 2 assigns to the President the power to, quote, nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law. End quote. Thus, the President has the power to make all appointments not otherwise provided for in the Constitution. These are subject to the Senate's advice and consent unless Congress, by law, vests the appointment of such inferior officers as they may think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. End quote. In other words, the unelected government, which I have called the fourth branch, is rooted in the Constitution through the powers that it grants either to the President or to Congress. In turn, Congress may grant the President, the courts, or heads of departments the power to hire unelected public servants. In all cases, however, the creation of the unelected government flows from the Constitution, the supreme authority and originating law of the nation. The framers of the Constitution recognized that the elected government of our republic was not in itself sufficient to govern us. It cannot alone get government done. It does not alone possess all the expertise necessary to lead, let alone manage, so vast an enterprise as a nation. If this was true in the late 18th century, it's even truer in the 21st century geopolitical and technological environment that is far more complex, and that therefore requires a cadre of professionals possessing a wide variety of specialized skills, training, education, and experience. The Constitution does not call these appointments and hires a fourth branch, but that is what the federal service and other government workers constitute. De jure, in law, There is no fourth branch of U.S. government, yet it unquestionably exists de facto, in practice, in reality, in fact. Does the fourth branch compete with the three constitutionally established branches? No. It coexists with them as provided for in Section 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution itself. Those three constitutional branches are absolutely necessary to our republic, but they are not sufficient to it, as the framers acknowledged. Moreover, as I've already observed, for most people, most of the time, and in most situations, it is the member of the fourth branch who are, practically speaking, the government. They are the doers. They implement the policies created and interpreted by the three constitutional branches. What is more, although they do not decide or decree policy, they often influence it, not covertly, but by intention and design. The Constitution assigns the Senate the roles of advising on and consenting to most major presidential appointments, but members of the fourth branch do far more advising on a daily basis when it comes to providing the subject matter expertise and feedback necessary to formulate and modify policy decisions. As it turned out, following the coming into effect of the Constitution in 1789, the President, the chief executive, that is the elected official responsible for faithfully executing the laws, directly or indirectly appointed the unelected personnel whom he deemed necessary to execute government. Most of the agencies in which personnel of the unelected government served were created by the executive branch under Article 2. And for a full 170 years after the Constitution was ratified, the President had the unquestioned authority to appoint and to terminate what were, in effect, employees of his branch, the executive branch. Indeed, in 1789, Congress explicitly voted, by a narrow margin, that it had no authority of approval or disapproval of presidential decisions to terminate appointees. Only those few public positions that were independent of the executive branch, which today are known as independent agencies, were not subject to presidential appointment or termination. In 1829, Andrew Jackson took office as the 7th President of the United States. He was regarded as the apostle of the rights of the common man, and he made it clear that he intended to usher in an area of a more highly participatory democracy. During his 2 terms and under his influence, many states substantially extended the still males-only franchise by dropping property requirements from the ballot, and Johnson waged a mighty battle against the Second Bank of the United States in a successful effort to loosen credit and thereby free up sources for finance. In Defense of Public Service by Cedric Alexander.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to hour 3 of our program. I wanted to start with a geeky science, actually, rather than the news, in part because I want to save a little time. Well, actually, I'm going to reverse it right now. I'm going to pause the geeky science. I'm going to start out with this longer story because this is going to be kind of a long rant, and I just want to dig right into it. Okay. This was posted by Velocity Visual over on Daily Kos, who apparently copied it from someplace else. So I don't know the provenance of this, or with the origin of it, but it's just brilliant. And it's just a quick reminder, just in case you forgot how wonderful the 4 years of the Trump presidency was. So let's just go through it very quickly, huh? President Trump incited an insurrection against the government. He mismanaged a pandemic that killed nearly 500,000 Americans. He separated children from their families. He lost those children in the bureaucracy. He tear-gassed peaceful protesters on Lafayette Square so he could hold a photo op holding a Bible in front of a church. He tried to block all Muslims from entering the country. He got impeached. Then he got impeached again. He had the worst jobs record of any president in modern history. He pressured Ukraine to dig dirt on Joe Biden. He fired the FBI director for investigating his ties to Russia. He bragged about firing the FBI director on television. He took Vladimir Putin's word over the U.S. intelligence community.
He diverted military funding from military families, to build his wall. He caused the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. He called Black Lives Matter a symbol of hate. He lied over 30,000 times. He banned transgender people from serving in the military. He ejected reporters from the White House briefing room when they asked tough questions. He vetoed the defense funding bill because it renamed military bases named for Confederate soldiers. He refused to release his tax returns. He increased the national debt by nearly $8 trillion. He had 3 of the highest annual trade deficits in American history. He called veterans and soldiers who died in combat losers and suckers. He coddled the leader of Saudi Arabia after he ordered the execution and dismembering of an American-based journalist. He refused to concede the 2020 election he lost. He hired his unqualified daughter and son-in-law to work in the White House. He walked out of an interview with Leslie Stahl. He called neo-Nazis very fine people. He suggested the people who inject bleach into their bodies should inject bleach to fight COVID. He abandoned our allies, the Kurds, to Turkey. He pushed through massive tax cuts for the wealthiest, but balked at any help for average Americans. He incited anti-lockdown protesters in several states at the height of the pandemic. He withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accords. He withdrew the U.S. from the Iranian nuclear deal. He withdrew the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership that was designed to block China's advances. He insulted his own cabinet members on Twitter. He pushed the leader of Montenegro out of the way during a photo op. He failed to reiterate the U.S. commitment to defending NATO allies. He called Haiti and African nations S-hole countries. He called the city of Baltimore the worst in the nation. He claimed that he single-handedly brought back the phrase Merry Christmas, even though it hadn't gone anywhere. He forced his cabinet members to praise him publicly like some cult leader. He believed he should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He berated and belittled his hand-picked attorney general when he recused himself from the Russia probe. He suggested the U.S. should buy Greenland. He colluded with Mitch McConnell to push through federal judges and 2 Supreme Court justices after supporting efforts to prevent his predecessor from appointing judges. He repeatedly called media the enemies of the people, echoing Joseph Stalin. He claimed that if we tested fewer people for COVID, we'd have fewer cases. He violated the Emoluments Clause. He thought that Nambia was a country, He told Bob Woodward in private that coronavirus was a big deal, but then lied about it in public. He called his exceedingly faithful vice president a P-word for following the Constitution. He nearly got us into a war with Iran after threatening them by tweet. He nominated a corrupt head of the EPA. He nominated a corrupt head of HHS. He nominated a corrupt head of the Interior Department. He nominated a corrupt head of the USDA. He praised dictators and authoritarians around the world while criticizing American allies. He refused to allow the presidential transition to begin when he lost the election. He insulted war hero John McCain, even after his death. He spent an obscene amount of time playing golf after criticizing Barack Obama for playing far less golf. He falsely claimed that he won the 2016 popular vote when he lost by 3 million. He called the Muslim mayor of London a stone. He falsely claimed that he turned down being Times Man of the Year. He considered firing special counsel Robert Mueller on several occasions. He mocked wearing face masks to guard against transmitting COVID, leading to hundreds of thousands of deaths. He locked Congress out of its constitutional duty to confirm cabinet members by appointing acting ones. He used a racist dog whistle by calling COVID the China virus. He hired and associated with numerous shady figures that were eventually convicted of federal offenses, including his own campaign manager and his own national security advisor. He pardoned several of his shady associates. He gave the Presidential Medal of Freedom to 2 congressmen who amplified his bat-crazy conspiracy theories. He got into a telephone fight with the leader of Australia. He had a Secretary of State who called him a moron. He forced his press secretary to claim without merit that he had the largest inauguration crowd in history. He botched the COVID vaccine rollout. He tweeted so much dangerous propaganda that Twitter eventually banned him. He charged the Secret Service jacked up rates at his properties. He constantly interrupted Joe Biden in his first presidential debate. He claimed that COVID would magically disappear. He called a U.S. Senator Pocahontas a racist slur. He used his Twitter account to blast Nordstrom when it stopped selling Ivanka's merchandise. He opened up millions of pristine federal lands to development and drilling. He got into a losing tariff war with China that cost U.S. taxpayers to bail out farmers. He claimed that his losing tariff war was a win for the U.S. He ignored or even didn't take part in daily intelligence briefings. He blew off honoring American war dead in France because it was raining. He redesigned Air Force One to look like the Trump shuttle. He got played by Kim Jong-un and his love letters. He threatened to go after social media companies in clear violation of the Constitution. He botched the response to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. He threw paper towels at Puerto Ricans when he finally visited them. He pressured the governor and Secretary of State of Georgia to find him votes. He thought he thought that the Virgin Islands had a president. He drew on a map with a Sharpie to justify his inaccurate tweet that Alabama was threatened by a hurricane. He allowed White House staff to use personal email accounts for official business after blasting Hillary Clinton for doing the same thing. He rolled back regulations that protected the public from mercury and asbestos. He pushed regulators to waste time studying snake oil remedies for COVID. He rolled back regulations that stopped coal companies from dumping waste into rivers. He held blatant campaign rallies at the White House in violation of the Hatch Act. He tried to take away millions of Americans' health insurance because the law was named for a black man. He refused to attend his successor's inauguration. He nominated the worst education secretary in history. He threatened judges who wouldn't do what he wanted. He attacked Dr. Anthony Fauci. He promised that Mexico would pay for a wall. It didn't. He allowed political hacks to overrule government scientists on major reports on climate change. He struggled navigating a ramp after claiming his opponent was feeble. He called an African-American congresswoman low IQ. He threatened to withhold federal aid from cities and states with Democratic leaders. He went ahead with rallies filled with maskless supporters in the middle of a pandemic. He claimed that legitimate investigations of his wrongdoing were witch hunts. He seemed to demonstrate a belief that there were airports during the American Revolution. He demanded total loyalty from the FBI director. He praised a conspiracy theory that Democrats are satanic pedophiles. He completely gutted the Voice of America. He placed a political hack in charge of the Postal Service. He claimed without evidence that the Obama administration bugged Trump Tower. He suggested that the U.S. should allow more people from places like Norway into our country. He suggested that COVID wasn't that bad because he recovered with the help of top government doctors and treatments not available to the public. He overturned energy conservation standards that even the industry supported. He reduced the number of refugees the U.S. accepts. He insulted various members of Congress and the media with infantile nicknames. He gave Rush Limbaugh, for God's sake, a Presidential Medal of Freedom at the State of the Union address. He named as head of the federal personnel a 29-year-old who had been previously fired from the White House for allegations of financial improprieties. He eliminated the White House Office of Pandemic Response. He used soldiers as campaign props in violation of the Hatch Act. He fired any advisor who made the mistake of disagreeing with him. He demanded the Pentagon throw him a Soviet-style military parade. He hired a ton of white nationalists. He politicized the civil service. He did absolutely nothing after Russia hacked the U.S. government. He falsely said the Boy Scouts called him to say his bizarre jamboree speech was the best speech ever given to the Scouts. He claimed that black people would overrun the suburbs if Biden won. He insulted reporters of color. He insulted women reporters. He insulted women reporters of color. He suggested that he was fine with China's oppression of 1 million Uyghurs. He attacked the Supreme Court when it ruled against him. He summoned Pennsylvania state legislators to the White House to pressure them to overturn the election. He spent countless hours every day watching Fox News. He refused to allow his administration to comply with congressional subpoenas. He hired Rudy Giuliani as his lawyer. He tried to punish Amazon because the Jeff Bezos-owned Washington Post wrote a negative story about him. He acted as if the Attorney General of the United States was his own personal attorney. He attempted to get the federal government to defend him in a libel lawsuit from a woman who accused him of sexual assault. He held private meetings with Vladimir Putin without staff present. He didn't disclose his private meetings with Vladimir Putin so that the U.S. had to find out via Russia media. He stopped holding press conferences for months at a time. He ordered U.S. companies to leave China even though he has no such power. He led a political party that couldn't even be bothered to draft a policy platform. He claimed preposterously that Article 2 of the Constitution gave him absolute power. He tried to pressure the UK to hold the British Open at his golf course. He suggested that the government could nuke hurricanes. He suggested that wind turbines cause cancer. He said he had a special aptitude for science. He fired the head of election cybersecurity after that man said that the 2020 election was secure. He blurted out classified information to Russian officials. He tried to force the G7 to hold their meeting at his failing golf resort in Florida. He fired the acting attorney general when she refused to go along with his unconstitutional Muslim travel ban. He hired Stephen Miller.
He openly discussed national security issues in the dining room at Mar-a-Lago where everyone could hear them. He interfered with plans to relocate the FBI because a new development there might compete with his hotel. He abandoned Iraqi refugees who helped the U.S. during the war. He tried to get Russia back into the G7. He held a COVID super spreader event at the Rose Garden. He seemed to believe that Frederick Douglass is still alive. He lost 60 election fraud cases in court, including before judges he had nominated. He falsely claimed that factories were reopening when they weren't. He shamelessly exploited terror attacks in Europe to justify his anti-immigrant policies. He still hasn't come up with a health care plan, still hasn't come up with an infrastructure plan, forced Secret Service agents to drive him around Walter Reed while contagious with COVID, told the Proud Boys to stand by and stand back, screwed up the census, withdrew the U.S. from the World Health Organization in the middle of a pandemic. And this is only the beginning of the list.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'm only about halfway through it. It's 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Paul in Ambler, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about third parties in the upcoming presidential election. We're your audience. When I'm saying we, I mean a lot of the people that are listening to you. We're probably some of the most highly informed and politically astute people that you're going to find. We invest time in listening to news. We read news, and then we have a community we can gather around. Your show, for example. Recently, there's been a sort of dust-up among AOC, the congresswoman from New York, and some of the one of the candidates from a third party, Jill Stein. And I don't want to go into a long deal about that, but what I wanted to comment on is all the people out there who might be listening or people you know aren't really sure they're what do you call it, independents. They're not in the Democratic Party. They're not in the Republican Party. Maybe they're in the Green Party. Maybe they're in the Libertarian Party. Or maybe they're in one of the other. There's literally hundreds of very small parties that are on the state and local level. What I'd like to point out is one of the criticisms that AOC laid at the feet of the Green Party. It's been 24 years since Ralph Nader ran, and many people, including myself, were very excited about the Green Party 24 years ago because they were expanding. They were opening up state parties. They weren't just in 5 or 10 states like in New York and California.
And they were focusing on policy. I voted for Ralph Nader in 2000 because I lived in Vermont and I knew it wouldn't hurt Al Gore. But, it's a very different party now, Paul. I'm assuming that's where you're going.
Well, where I'm going is they haven't done anything in 24 years. They haven't done anything in 24 years. Locally, there's a third party that operates in New York State, around New York City, and in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, and they're expanding outwards, but they're moving from the bottom up. They got into Philadelphia City Council. They've basically wiped out the Republican Party. I mean, I think there's one left, and he's basically like an Eisenhower Republican. I mean, I don't know how else to describe him. In Montgomery County, where I'm at, over 850,000 people. It's a very large county. It's very Democratic. It's basically run by Democrats from top to bottom. They tried to do the same thing. There's always, because of a lot of the fairness that came in out of post-World War II and reform movements on the local and municipal and county level, you have a whole lot of let's reserve a place for a minority party, which meant if you had 2 or 3 or 4 or more people on a commission or a council, you let the Republicans have a spot at least or 2, or the Democrats have a spot or 2, just so you didn't have, the terrible corruption that we saw.
Seems like a good
early
plan.
On in the
Paul,
country.
I only have 20 seconds to a hard break. You want to make your point?
Yeah. I would tell people that the Green Party hasn't done anything. People like the Working People's Party have gotten into the local level. Now, they haven't had grandiose plans for the presidency and grandiose plans for stopping Israel from getting weapons from the United States. I'd like to do that, but I don't know how it's going to happen.
Yeah, plus you've got fusion voting in New York. You know, where you
Well,
can
yeah,
you can vote for a third-party
ahead.
candidate, and it's also counted as a vote for a Democrat or a Republican.
I don't know what we can say to the people who have this moral absolutism that they're so superior they can't possibly vote for Kamala Harris because the people are dying in Gaza.
I'm with you, Paul. Thank you. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So the Washington Post reported that it looks like General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the dictator of Egypt, organized a $10 million cash bribe to Donald Trump when he was most desperate for cash during the 2016 election. And then Donald Trump repaid him by embracing him, bringing him into the White House, making Egypt one of his visits, and just doing things that normally you don't do with countries that are run by dictators. The Washington Post pretty much nailed this. Well, why didn't we learn about this earlier? The FBI investigated it starting in 2018, but in 2019, Attorney General Bill Barr shut down the investigation. This is not the first time he has done this. He also shut down the investigation into the Iran-Contra affair, where the Reagan campaign was paying Iran with weaponry to hold the hostages to screw Jimmy Carter. There's an op-ed about it over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, "When Will Bill Barr Be Brought to Justice?" Check it out.
I'm here on the airwaves, ready for the fight. I'm challenging the voices that think they know what's right. You call me liberal, I wear it like a crown.
There you go.
I dare you to come forward, don't you back down. Come into my show, bring your facts.
Yeah, I thought this was the Liberal Talk Radio song. Anyhow, welcome back. It's 24 minutes past the hour, and Geeky Science for the day. By the way, the rest of that long list you can find over on Daily Kos. Being mentally resilient could be the key to living longer. This is a fascinating study. And in fact, the author of it, Sarah Knapton, it was published in the Telegraph, the British newspaper, points out that this was kind of the foundation of Stoicism. Zeno of Citium in 301 BC founded Stoicism. He was a wealthy merchant who lost his ship at sea, lost his fortune, ended up begging on the streets of Athens, I think, or Cyprus. Athens. He was begging on the streets of Athens, and he came up with this school of Stoicism, which was basically bad stuff is going to happen, and it's not what happens to us that matters, it's how we react to it. And if we react to bad things by rising above them and standing up and taking a deep breath and lifting our head up high and moving forward, life will be much better. That's, kind of the essential primary tenet of Stoicism. Thus the phrase, oh, he's a Stoic, right? Well, now they've done some research on this. This was done by a university. They looked at the health records of 10,000 Americans who had signed up for the U.S. Health and Retirement Study. All of them were over 50. They filled out a questionnaire about their mental health that scored them on perseverance, calmness, sense of purpose, self-reliance, and the recognition that certain experiences must be faced alone. Over the following decade, the following 10 years, 3,489 of those people, out of those 10,000 people, died. So they looked at the association between the risk of death and mental resilience. And what they found was that the people in the highest quartile, the highest quarter of resilience, were 53% less likely to die in the following 10 years than people in the bottom quartile. Just 61% of those who scored in the bottom quartile for resistance survived, whereas 84% of the people who scored in the highest quartile for resistance survived. Moral of the story, adopt Stoicism. Don't be afraid to confront the challenges that life throws at us and push through them. 27 minutes past the hour. I'll be right back with you with your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Sean has her own version of it. Don't get mad, get even. We'll be right back. I'll pick up your calls after this break.
Our book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhubuti. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the civil rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services at Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, "A lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith," end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. You know, all across America, families are in mourning. Their parents and grandparents, particularly the men in their lives, have been stolen from them by the right-wing hate and rage machine, particularly Fox so-called news. Jen Senko produced a movie. It's called The Brainwashing of My Dad, about losing her own father to Fox so-called news. It was also made into a book. But now comes along Tim Walz, and Tim Walz is like everybody's dad, everybody's grandpa. He's the grandpa that you wish could sit down with your grandpa who's been indoctrinated by Fox News and kind of wake him up out of the trance. He's the dad that people who grew up in dysfunctional families wish they had. He's just a normal guy. You know, he joined the Army National Guard right out of high school. He rose up to Commander Sergeant Major. He became a top advocate for America's vets. He went to college, got his master's degree, taught high school social studies. He's a good man. He smiles. His students love him. There's a whole op-ed about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
In the land of the free, a shadow fell. A storm was brewing, could you tell? A man with power, a voice so loud, riled up the fear, drew a crowd. He spoke of greatness, a wall so high, but underneath, the hate did lie. From screens and rallies, the fire spread, a virus of hate so many misled. The Trump hate virus spreading wide. Innocence lost, love pushed aside. In the hearts of many, darkness grows.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online,
your call, Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I did a little searching for that German lady that's having trouble proving she's an American citizen from 1971, and there's a Freedom of Information Act that was established in 1966, and that year is important because she immigrated in 1971. So her records should be there, and she can look that up, and anyone in America can look up their records relevant to them at www.uscis.gov/F like Frank OIA.
As in
That's
Freedom of Information.
Freedom of Information Act. Yeah, Freedom of Information Act, dated back to 1966. Even though we didn't have computers back then, they would have hard records, and I would assume they probably should have digitized them at some point.
Right. Well, she had her actual documentation with her. They just looked at it and said, we don't think this is altogether, we think there's something skeezy here.
She might be able to get something from them that has an official stamp or a seal of some sort.
Well, thank you for that,
And at
Sandra.
that point, if Texas says still no, I would file a lawsuit against them and make it very public.
I think after the election, she probably won't have any problem. My guess is that, she's a woman and there's an election coming up in Texas. I mean, it's not a coincidence.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
exactly.
But thank you for that. That's you want to give that URL one more time, just in case she's listening right now.
Just in case. It's www.uscis.gov/F like Frank OIA. That's called Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA.
Great.
Is how I would pronounce it.
Okay.
It was established in 1966.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you very much.
And that's for any American.
Yeah, I get it.
Any citizen.
I get it. Thank you so much. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Greetings, Tom. We had another mass shooting, as I'm sure you were speaking about it earlier.
Yeah, it was the 8th school shooting so far this school year, which is only 3 days old.
Yeah, and then once again, I place blame at Trump, at J.D. Vance, at these Republicans and NRA, because they're the ones that set this pattern and not once coming up with a corrective plan of action, legitimate corrective plan of action to stop the
And let's
massacre.
not forget the 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court who particularly the Heller decision, just, corruptly bowed to the NRA.
That's why I said GOPs, because they fall right into that category. Yeah. And I want to hear crap about a good guy with a gun stopping with a bad guy with a gun. That is a load of crap and a cop-out. I mean, and then they want to talk about anti-abortion this or that when they're the number one abortionist. Now, I should ask them, what the hell you want to bring children to the world for? So you can freaking kill them and butcher them and all that
well,
stuff?
Well, Trump says that in 6 states it's illegal to abort a child after it's born. Maybe what he's talking about is shooting them in the school.
Because that's what I'm saying. That's the only abortion that's really going on, and it's caused by them. You know what I'm saying? And,
I get it.
And it's just, I'm just so fed up with it. But then I noticed something else too, Tom, real quickly before I go, is that I noticed there are more Republicans that are trending away from Trump, away from Vance, away from the weirdness, and endorsing Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Yep.
Latest example, of course, being Liz Cheney.
Yep.
And I'm wondering,
Yesterday.
How many people have contributed to Trump and company and now regret it, especially like music stars? I mean, what would they say to Trump? But, you're a thief, you're a thief, give me back my money, you SOB.
I get it. Yeah, you're not going to make a career as a singer, Michael, but a good try. Michael, thank you. Thank you. That was great. Good talking to you. Tim in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go back to Ryan Walters. I'm from Oklahoma. I actually know Ryan. In the situation we're seeing unfold in Oklahoma,
he's the superintendent of public instruction or public education, correct?
Correct. The superintendent of the Department of Education in Oklahoma, yes.
Okay.
So what we're seeing unfold is something that has been in the works. They've planned this out at least a decade back.
Whoa.
If you give me a moment, I'll explain it. I've done the research here. The Catholic Conference of Oklahoma, Brett Farley is the executive director, or at least he was at the time. He was filing the postcards for a little-known company at that time called Every Kid Counts Oklahoma. Well, right before Ryan Walters got in there, all of a sudden, Every Kid Counts Oklahoma started getting all this money, and they put Ryan in charge as the executive director of Every Kid Counts Oklahoma. But this was in 2016, so it sat there for almost 10 years, I guess, before they put him in there. And then immediately he got tapped as the Secretary of Education, and then he ran for the the superintendent. So this is something that the Catholic Church and those far-right extremist people have been planning in Oklahoma for a long time.
Wow. Tim, thank you.
Yeah,
thanks for the details.
Wild.
Yeah. So you're saying that the guy who's in charge, the statewide superintendent of schools or head of the Department of Education in Oklahoma, used to work for a nonprofit whose mission was to put Bibles in schools that was funded by the Catholic Church. Am I summarizing it correctly?
Basically, but see, every kid counts Oklahoma. If you'll recall back in the day, he mismanaged some funds as the Secretary of Education. There was a class wallet. You'll probably know about that lawsuit where they were supposed to be funding, but then they let all the parents just blow money on TVs and gaming consoles and stuff, right? So, but this was just a way to kind of grease him so that he would fit in with the politics.
Right, that was the voucher
thing. So if yes, but that was run. That the postcards, the 990 postcards that were filed to the Secretary of State, were filed by Brett Farley, who was the executive director of the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma, who would then later become on the board of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma.
Wow.
So you know, there's the Catholic Church's fingerprints all over it.
Well, you wonder how
10 years at least.
Yeah, you wonder how big the Catholic Church is behind things like Ron DeSantis and you know, in Texas, Greg Abbott, you know, statewide voucher programs for schools too, because they're major beneficiaries of this because they run religious schools.
Right, and I can't tell if it's like a religious thing or if they just want to be able to funnel money from these private, you know, Christian schools into the hands of their friends who can run those, like, you know, the management companies that run these private charter schools, right? Or the charter schools. Well,
it might.
So it's a, you know, it's a way to.
Multiple things can be true. I mean, it could be all of the above. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
I get it.
I mean, you know, take it where you can get it, I guess.
There you go. Tim, thank you. Thank you very much for that information. That was brilliant. Thank you. Burke in Houston, Texas. Hey, Burke, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's an honor to speak with you, sir.
Thank you. What's up?
So I'm going back to the name thing for women, where their last names become middle names.
Right.
I remember my mother, my late mother. Her middle name was B. Her middle name became L. It's not important what the two names were,
right.
But she had told me, no, this is normal, and this is something, and this is where, at least I'm going by her history, this is something that came from the Deep South. Your identity as a woman is erased. You're no longer Mrs. Smith. Now you're Smith Jones.
In other words, the tradition of replacing a woman's middle name with her, when she gets married, with her maiden name is something that came out of the South. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Interesting.
And I really am going to trust my late mother on this because she was an educator, but her big thing was, it's to erase who you were.
Well, the Confederate States were incredibly patriarchal. I mean, you know, they were, you know, they ran a right-wing kind of fascist operation down there. So that makes a certain amount of sense. It'd be fascinating to get an ethno-historian on the program and ask that. You know, I have no idea who would be an expert on this stuff, but that's interesting. Burke, thank you. Thanks for sharing your mother's story with us. Appreciate it. Good talking to you. 45 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Picking up your calls here. I'll be right back with you in just a moment. And welcome back. Rob in Covington, Tennessee. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today?
I got some information for you about your little Cox theory right there. I was inside of Cox about 10 years ago doing work for them under their stock tracking systems. I know a little bit of something that you don't. This system has been getting developed ever since about 2014, and it was supposed to release in 2018. This was a brainchild of one Eric Field, the director at Cox. I cannot believe that this project got postponed as long as it has. But I can tell you this much: to your viewers, I have this to say: beware of T-Mobile, AT&T, and Cellular South, because Cox has a contract with them. That right there is the vehicle that they are using to tap into your phones.
Yeah, for people who don't know what we're talking about, Rob, I did I shared a story that was in The Guardian yesterday. It's probably still up, about how Cox Media Group had been offering for sale a product, and I don't know much beyond that or what the details of it were, that listens to you continuously from your smart device, whether it's your phone, your TV, or your tablet, or your computer. We don't know for sure. Although in the deck, they had a picture of a person with a smartphone, and listens for keywords that advertisers have paid for. And when they hear those keywords, the advertiser's ad gets delivered to the person's phone the next time they open it, looking at whatever they happen to be looking at. That's what we're talking about here, Rob, right?
Yeah, correct. And I can tell you that there is a Splunk-powered system in Atlanta, Georgia, and Tempe, Arizona, that is being fed this information, as well as T-Mobile, AT&T, and Cellular South all have dirty diapers in this.
Wow, fascinating. Okay, well, I can't validate or verify that, Rob. It's fascinating to hear. We'll have to do a little more digging, but thank you. Thanks for sharing your experience with us. Karen in New Orleans. Hey, Karen, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Earlier you had a caller that wanted Pete Buttigieg as chief of staff. Right. And I've been thinking on this because I don't like it when they take senators out of the Senate for cabinets, but Shelton Whitehouse knows more about the Supreme Court than any person on the planet, and he needs to be the Attorney General. We need to get rid of him.
I have told that to him. I have told him that twice on this program.
Wonderful. Keep telling him.
And both times, his response was a great big wide smile.
I love it. I love it.
So
I love him smiling.
Yeah, he's a good man. He's a really good man. He's one of the best guys in the Senate. He's right up there with Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. I mean, there's a handful of just brilliant senators. Jeff Merkley, Ron Wyden.
Secondly, Buttigieg. If anybody can get re-invited to Fox News that's a Democrat, he's got a silver tongue, and he needs to be Secretary of State.
Yeah.
I bet you he can whip them together.
I think Anthony Blinken is doing a hell of a good job.
Well,
I wouldn't fire him. I would keep him on. I am really impressed by this guy. He's a statesman. He's, there's no grandstanding. There's no drama. He gets stuff done. I'm just so blown away by Anthony Blinken. I don't think that she needs to replace him.
I think everybody ought to have a list of who they suggest, and somebody collate it somehow. Because
I'm with you. And Pete Buttigieg, I mean, he can have any job he wants. I mean, that guy is brilliant too.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. He's got a silver tongue. He can convince anybody of anything.
I'd like to see him in the Senate, but he's from Michigan right now, so that's a problem. Karen, I got to run. Thank you for the call. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. So all over the United States, Republican-controlled states have been purging their voter lists, particularly of people who live in big cities, more likely to be Democratic voters. It's become kind of an art form for Republicans. When they were doing it in Ohio some years ago, back in 2012, I believe, there was a lawsuit that took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Republicans on the Supreme Court said, that's fine, they can purge voters in the big cities, no problem. So it's really going into high gear. But it pisses people off when they show up at the polls and find out that they've been purged. So now Texas has come up with a whole new scam. They've got this thing called the suspend list. And the suspend list, if you're on the suspend list, when you show up, you're given a provisional ballot. Provisional ballots are basically placebo ballots. More often than not, they don't get counted. And so this is the new little scheme. There's a whole article about it, Democracy Undone, the Texas placebo ballot plot, over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
They say our voice voices count, but they shut the door. Lines stretch for miles in the heat and the cold. They change the rules, move the polls. They make it hard just to cast our vote, to play our part. All voter suppression, stealing our rights in the land of the free. We've got to fight for every voice to be heard, every vote to be cast, to break these chains, make our freedom last. Argue laws and purges, they target the poor, minorities, the young, they silence the roar. They gerrymander districts, twist and turn, hoping we'll give up our power they'll spurn.
There you go, 52 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Rick in Newark, New Jersey. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Hello.
Hey, Rick, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. How you doing, Tom? Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I heard you had a couple of conversations with people about voter registration and people who were struggling with it. Dean Obadala had someone on, I think it was last night, from voteriders.org.
Okay.
Great organization, and they're doing some really good work on helping people. They actually have lawyers who do pro bono, and they just try to get people the identification.
That's
and
great.
things
Riders like riding a car? R-I-D-E-R-S?
Yes,
okay.
R-I-D-E-R-S.
Right.
First word is vote,
yep.
And it's a .org.
Yeah.
And, if a problem, first always check their registration many times before they go to vote.
Yeah.
But after that,
So our caller from Texas who's facing some obstruction should probably contact them. That's great advice, Rick. Thank you so much for that. Dean's a great guy, and he, I'm not surprised that he has he got a smart guest on. Thank you. That's great. Ron in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, just give me 1 second here. I just have a question. Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Hello? Yeah, I just have a question for you regarding the comment you made about Jill Stein being a grifter. I just want to kind of, research that a little bit because I don't know. I'm kind of up in the air about Kamala Harris, to tell you the truth. Not because of anything other than
back in 2020, back in 2000, when Ralph Nader was running on the Green Party ticket. The Green Party, for the decade prior to that, the 1990s, had been doing just great work. They had been all over the country. In fact, there are 380 communities in the United States that have instant runoff voting, and every single one of them was the result of work done at the grassroots level by the Green Party. And the Green Party was, they were talking about climate change before anybody was talking about climate change. They were doing just great work. And so in the 2000 election, I lived in Vermont, and I knew that my vote for Al Gore would not hurt or help him. Vermont was going to go for him. And so I voted for Ralph Nader. And that was the last year that the Green Party did anything worthwhile. Basically, the Green Party since then has just gone quiet. They haven't been pushing legislation. They haven't been pushing issues. They haven't been signing up. Instead, what's happened during the 8 years that Jill Stein has been running it, or maybe it's 12 years now, is that every 4 years she pops up, she does a crap load of fundraising, no doubt puts some of that money in her own back pocket, runs for president, and in the 2016 election, when Jill Stein was running for president, in the 5 states where Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton and thus won the Electoral College, Jill Stein got more votes in each one of those states than the margin by which Donald Trump won. In other words, had Jill Stein not been on the ballot in those states, we would have gotten President Hillary Clinton. And that's why the Russians have been supporting her. That's why she was invited to have dinner with Vladimir Putin in the middle of December in 2015. That's why she gets featured prominently on RT television. And it's why they're pushing her again this year. So yeah, I think she's a grifter. She pops up every 4 years to fundraise and mess with our elections. Ron, I got to run, but thank you for the call, and and thank you for your concern. I mean, it is important to learn about these things, and if you've got questions about things I've said, I encourage you to call me and call me out if you think I'm wrong. Thanks again for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. Stay safe.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss